I'm going to call this meeting to order, the March 29th workshop meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And the first item of the agenda is to say the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. This morning, we're going to take a little bit of different tact on our agenda. We have some folks that we'd like to recognize and honor today that are on the workshop agenda. And so I have convened this workshop, on the action agenda. So I've convened the workshop. I'm now going to adjourn the workshop meeting. And now I'm going to convene the action meeting. Once we do our one agenda item on the action meeting, I will adjourn that, and I'll reopen our workshop meeting. We'll come back and be in our regular cadence. So with that, item 4 on our action agenda, Mr. Robbie Prezioso is here, and Senator Carrico is here, and Mrs. Walter is here this morning. Thank you, Robbie.
Good morning, sir. The item we have before you today is a memorial naming of a bridge in Chesterfield County. It will be for Special Agent Michael T. Walter Memorial Bridge. This will be for Route US 60 Midlothian Turnpike over State Route 288 in Chesterfield County.
Prezioso, would you all like to join us up here, Senator and Ms. Walter? We'd love to have you.
Just a little brief background. Typically, when we have these namings, a naming for an individual comes from a county. In this case, it's a former state employee, and the request comes from the superintendent of the state police, Colonel Gary T. Settle. He's requested that we do this naming on behalf of Special Agent Walter. Just some brief background, and we'll provide some comments from Senator Carrico and Ms. Walter, that on May 26, 2017, Special Agent Walter was shot during a traffic stop. It was a high visibility patrol, and he, along with other officers from Richmond City, encountered a vehicle that had been flagged. It was facing the wrong direction. They approached it, and the vehicle was wanted in Lancaster County, and they attempted to take the individual into custody. Unbeknownst, the individual fired a shot, and Special Agent Walter was killed accordingly. He was also a veteran of the Marine Corps, and he spent 18 years with the state police. We've reviewed this, and we recommend that your approval of that. I'd like to share.
Senator Carrico.
Well, thank you, Mr. Secretary and members of the board. I am here with Special Agent Walter's wife, Jamie Walters. We're asking for this naming of this bridge because, you know, in our church we have this saying, live a legacy and leave a legacy. And I think that speaks volumes as to what Michael Walter did for the Commonwealth and for his country. A Marine, a trooper. He was always helping kids. He has a gym in Powhatan County named after him for where he coached wrestling for the children there. And he was a very upstanding and well thought of trooper and agent. We've lost 66 troopers in our 90 years of existence. We've had almost half of those that we have lost have recognitions made, whether it be through bridges, road namings, or whatever. And it's one of the way Virginia recognizes that legacy. And we are asking for this bridge over 288 to be named. And it has a lot of significant to the family because Ms. Walters and Michael have two sons, and they use that bridge periodically, and they can see the father's name etched for a memorial on that bridge. With that being said, I'll turn it over to Ms. Walters and let her tell you a little bit about her story, and then we'll be brief. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Ms. Walters. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Good morning to you all, and thank you for giving me a few minutes. I wrote a little something down because I tend to get off track and I could talk for hours about my husband. So as you know, I'm Jamie Walter. My husband was not only Virginia's, also a special agent, former Marine Corps, and was in the Persian Gulf. He paid the ultimate sacrifice while working in Richmond City on a special project, FFI, which is the Federal Firearms Initiative. He did this for several summers. On May 26, 2017, he was shot and ultimately succumbed to his injuries on May 27th of 2017. He was an amazing husband, father, son, friend, mentor, and coach. He was a man of valor. His strength, love, kindness, and drive for life was very contagious. Having the 288 bridge at Midlothian, and I say / Powhatan, named in honor of my husband would mean more than words could express to my children and I. He is not forgotten, and we talk about him daily. But this marker would be a marker that he is not forgotten, not only by his family, but all that loved and cared for him. Our 3 children each gave me one word to describe their dad. Austin, his word was empowering. Mason, his word was fearless. Addison, hers was strong. I know my mic continues to look over us all and protects us and serves us from above. Thank you for having me and allowing me to speak on behalf of my husband and my family and my children. Thank you for your time, and I appreciate the consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Walters. Thank you, Ms. Walter. Mr. Prezioso, will you please read the resolution that's before us?
The resolution being proposed says, whereas the Virginia State Police has requested by letter dated January 13th, 2023, that the Commonwealth Transportation Board name the bridges on US 60 Midlothian Turnpike over State Route 288, Chesterfield County, as the Special Agent Michael T. Walter Memorial Bridge, to honor the life, service to his country and community, ultimate sacrifice of Virginia State Police Special Agent Michael T. Walter. And whereas Section 33.2-213 provides that any naming for a state official killed during the performance of his official duties, which includes a law enforcement officer employed by the Department of State Police or state highway transportation worker, shall require a letter or resolution from the head of the agency by which the state official was employed requesting such naming. And whereas in accordance with Section 33.2-213, Colonel Gary T. Settle, Superintendent of the Department of State Police, has provided a letter dated January 13th, 2023, requesting this naming to commemorate the life of Special Agent Michael T. Walter. And whereas Section 33.2-213 provides that the Virginia Department of Transportation shall place and maintain appropriate signs indicating the names of highways, bridges, interchanges, and other transportation facilities named by the CTB. And whereas 33.2-213 provides that for any state highway, bridge, interchange, or other transportation facility named after a state official killed during the performance of his official duties, the cost of the producing, placing, and maintaining those signs shall be paid from the Commonwealth Transportation Funds. Now therefore be it resolved pursuant to 33.2-213 of the Code of Virginia, the CTB hereby names the bridges on the US 60 Midlothian Turnpike over State Route 288, Chesterfield County, as the Special Agent Michael T. Walter Memorial Bridge. Be it further resolved that VDOT is directed to produce, maintain, place, and maintain the signs calling attention to this naming using the Commonwealth Transportation Funds to cover the cost thereof as required by law.
Thank you, Mr. Preziosi. Mr. Brown?
The Richmond District humbly moves the adoption of the resolution recognizing Special Agent Michael T. Walker and naming the bridge over 288, the bridge over Midlothian Turnpike and State Route 288 in his honor.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Second from Mrs. Hines. Please join me to signify your support by rising with me, please. Thank you very much. Ms. Walter, we're honored to have you here today. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you, Senator. It's always our pleasure to see you. God bless you. Thank you very much. I'm now going to temporarily adjourn the action meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board, and I'm going to recall to order us for the workshop of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. So we're back in the workshop, and our next item for the agenda in the workshop are public comments. Oh, I'm in the action, I'm sorry, wrong book. The first item in the workshop is the Hampton Roads Express Lanes Network. Mr. Hall, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. I'm here to brief you on a request for the board to authorize the Commissioner of Highways to enter into a standard project agreement with HR TAC for funding towards the Hampton Roads Express Lanes Network Transportation Management Plan. This transportation management plan was developed in collaboration with key regional stakeholders. Those stakeholders include several of our localities that will be directly affected by much of the congestion that will be a result of the significant construction going on over the next 3 to 4 years. These localities include the cities of Newport News, Hampton, Norfolk, Virginia Beach, and other key regional stakeholders to include the Hampton Roads Transit Authority, Port Authority, of course, HRTPO, and HR TAC. This group developed an implementation plan encompassing several strategies that focused on 3 key areas. Those key areas include regional communications, transit and transportation demand management, and traffic operations. Of course, all of these come together to help be more proactive in helping with mitigate region-wide construction activities. Lastly, to support this effort, HR TAC is providing $8 million for various strategies within this plan. So we will be coming back to you, or I will be coming back to you in the action meeting, again, pursuant to the master tolling agreement, to request your authorization to allow the commissioner to enter into the standard project agreement with HR TAC.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Do we have any questions? Thank you very much, sir.
All right, thank you, sir.
Next item on the agenda is item 2, the highway safety update. Mr. Mark Cole. Morning, sir.
Morning, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. I'm glad to be with you this morning to provide a highway safety update. I'm Mark Cole with the Virginia Department of Transportation, and I'll be joined today for part of the presentation by Angelisa Jennings from the Virginia Department of Motor Vehicles. So the purpose of today's presentation is to provide the board with some 2022 calendar year traffic crash results. We want to provide awareness related to this, and we'll be talking about crash numbers and trends, where crash types are occurring. We've received several questions from board members about highway safety and traffic crash numbers in recent months, and so we wanted to provide an update of where things are following receipt of the 2022 crash data. We'll also, with this information, it will provide background for upcoming discussions with the board this spring about safety target setting, which is the process we go through each year as required by Federal Highway to set our traffic safety targets. Before I get into the numbers, I did want to let you know that we just received the 2022 numbers from DMV a couple of weeks ago. So what we'll be sharing today is at a high level, but our team, VDOT, also with DMV, we're digging into these numbers in more detail, and we'll be able to share more insights in the future as we do that more detailed work. So here is the trend of traffic fatalities and serious injuries in Virginia over time since 2003. The orange line on the top shows the trend of traffic deaths in the state. And in 2022, those numbers rose to 1,005 from 968 in 2021. That was an increase of just under 4%. At the same time, across the country for the last several years, the nation has been dealing with increases in traffic deaths. In 2021, traffic deaths in the U.S. increased by 10%. And in 2020, it was up almost 7%. So this is an issue that we are really struggling and working hard to address in Virginia, but it's also a nationwide issue. While the deaths went up in 2022, our serious injuries went down. So serious injuries were down about 3.6% to just over 7,000, which when you look at that together, that's way too many travelers in Virginia that aren't getting back home safely. And so that's what a lot of our focus is here at VDOT, is on doing everything we can to work with our other partners to improve traffic safety on all our roads. If we look at these numbers by type of highway system, you can see the change in 2022 as compared to a 5-year annual average and as compared to the 2021 number. So on the interstates, the fatalities on the interstate system went down in 2022 compared to 2021, but we're still up compared to that 5-year average of 130. The primary system, we had almost 400, so 398 deaths in 2022. That was up from 379 in 2021. And is up also compared to the 5-year average. The VDOT secondary system, we saw 250 deaths in 2022, up from the 5-year average in 2021 value, which is both 219. On the locality maintained road system, locality primary saw 111 deaths in 2022. Which is slightly lower from 2021, but higher than the 5-year average. And the locality secondary system saw 102 deaths in 2022, up as compared to 2021 and the 5-year average. Part of our work to address traffic safety issues in the Commonwealth includes a steering committee that develops a strategic highway safety plan. Within that overall plan, we have a number of emphasis areas where, based on the data, we focus on those areas to try to improve traffic safety. Here we have the emphasis areas in our current strategic safety plan listed on the left, with the crash numbers from 2022 compared to the 5-year average and 2021 value listed. I've highlighted several of the areas, starting with the pedestrians, that in 2022 saw a big increase as compared to historical numbers. So in 2022, pedestrians, we had 171 people who died on Virginia's roads, and that's compared to a 5-year average of 120. At intersections, we also saw our numbers increase, 313 in 2022. 313 people died in intersection crashes, and that's compared to a 5-year average of 228. So that's a increase of 85 versus that number. The number of unbelted motorists who lost their lives in 2022 also was up 58 people compared to the 5-year average. And speed-related deaths were also up considerably, 70 higher in 2022 than the 5-year average. But if you look at other items on the list, most of these emphasis areas, we saw higher numbers in 2022 as compared to the historical trend.
Mark, can you go back a second? Is our data, you know, this chart's always sort of been hard for me because we start out with the with sort of types of folks, and then we go to where they are, and then we go to behavior, and they're all sort of mixed together. And I understand that, but I guess what I would ask is, if we looked at pedestrians, for example, how many of those would have been at intersections, and how many would have been speeding related, and how many would have been alcohol related, and et cetera? And to sort of get down to the next level of understanding what's happening with pedestrians. I mean, you know, there could be for example, there could be some outlier that happens where some car goes off the road and hits a group of people, which would be unusual, but would create a big number. And you know, while it's still the real number, it's different than if it's onesies, twosies all the time. Excuse me. Do we get to that level? Do we sort of get there in your analysis at all?
We do, and actually, right now that we've received the 2022 data a couple weeks ago, we're doing some of that analysis already. What I've already learned about pedestrian deaths in 2022 is a third of those involved alcohol. Either the driver or the pedestrian had alcohol in their system. Also, about 20% of those involved a speeding driver, as reported on the police report. So we do dig into those. We also know, with pedestrians in particular, visibility is key. 3 out of 4 of our pedestrian deaths occur in limited light. So it's either dark or dusk or dawn times of the day. When it's hard to see pedestrians, the street may not be lit. So we do look at those factors. We also look at a number of infrastructure factors too, and really dig pretty deep. So in the future, I'd be happy to talk in more detail about some of these.
I'll talk about some of this as you conclude the presentation on some things I'd like to see us try to figure out and work on. Not that you're not already doing that, but to your point, or to my point perhaps, we really got to get down to that level to really understand what's happening. And to your low visibility thing, Monday morning on the way here, I was coming down Route 17 at 60 miles an hour posted speed, and it was dark. It was 6 in the morning or something. And it was foggy as well, Monday morning. And appeared quickly right on the white line on the side of the road, walking towards me, a gentleman in black pants and a very dark maroon jacket. And he's literally right at the white line, and I'm coming down the road, and I got these big mirrors on my truck that stick out. I was like, whoa. And I wouldn't have hit him if I'd been in the road, but I'd been really close. And I moved over. My wife was behind me in a different car. She moved over, and she called me. She's like, oh, my God, what was that? And that was one of those things like, I was just thanking my stars and saying my prayers that I wasn't 8 inches further over to the right, because I'd have probably hit him. You never could have seen him. I mean, he just, boom, he was there. And, what do you do about that? Like, I don't think that's an engineering problem. I don't think it was a driving problem. I think it was somebody making a bad judgment and doing, if you walk down the center of an interstate, you're likely to get hit. It's not a good idea. And so somehow we've got to get to understand fully, and I'm getting into my later comments, what's causing these things to really get them to fix them. And I keep talking about driver behavior. Some of this is behavior, some of this is perhaps design. I was reading a piece on Vision Zero last night and this morning, and it talked about, as we've pushed to have more bike lanes and pedestrians and we've encouraged the intersection of people and bicycles and vehicles like we've never had before. And I'm not saying that's bad, but obviously there's consequences to that. And I continue to be concerned about how we do that. You put up a couple bollards, or you put a line down the road and say this is the bike lane. Well, as a guy who used to bike a lot, that doesn't give you a lot of protection if somebody makes an error. And so all these things that we're doing, we're all sort of coming together at once. And it's almost like we're feeding into our own problem. And somehow we got to figure out how to fix it. But I'm going on.
Mr. Secretary, you raise some good points there that point to how complex some of these issues are. So we certainly agree the need to dig into this data further. And we often do that, and we really focus at VDOT on trying to make improvements where we can help some of those factors that we learn that are infrastructure related. And then Angelisa, who will talk a little bit later, DMV really helps us try to get some of the education and enforcement support that we also need to address a lot of these issues.
It's all interrelated. I will say one other thing. I was reading in this article, and I think we sort of danced about it yesterday in a conversation, where some of the highway use manuals, I think both federal and some of the ones that we have, basically say, to look at a signalization or to look at this or look at that, you should have had X number of occurrences of a problem over a period of time. And occurrences of a problem are like an injury or a death. And, obviously that should attract your attention, but that shouldn't be the only reason, in my view. If you see something that's not engineered safely, I don't really care whether you've had an incident or not, because you're gonna have one. And, that's gonna be somebody. And if we know about it in advance and are just waiting for it to happen to hit the target to do something, that doesn't make a lot of sense to me, Commissioner, as he's grabbing his mic. So I don't know if that's the case or not, but things like that, we've just got to re-examine and really try to understand what the issue is here.
Secretary, if I may.
Yes.
The data here is obviously very informative. Dominion's had a very long journey and really becoming kind of the best in class with regard to our safety performance, across the industry. And we've gotten ours down to a very, very small percentage based on our employee base. And one of the ways we did that was doing root cause analysis. And I can tell that we're doing some of that. But I think the data that would be more informative for this board and driving decision-making would be to have that presented, right? It's where you take the confluence of those factors and you say, okay, now, was it the lighting? Was it the lanes? Was it the speed?
Exactly.
What is the root cause? And then almost kind of heat map that in order to target our focus. And again, just from our experience, we do that in our capacity, and we said, okay, we're seeing a lot of soft tissue injuries because folks aren't stretching. So we implemented a stretching regimen. Or we're seeing a lot of hand injuries. People aren't wearing gloves, so you start enforcing gloves. But it's until you get to that granular level of information, your ability to direct resources and to drive change becomes very limited because you don't know, it's kind of throwing a dart at a board. So and I'm sure that your team is thinking through that, and I think VDOT is going through that from a safety perspective as well. So I think maybe if we think about these fatalities in the same context as we think about how do we drive change for safety, maybe that helps to.
Yeah, I think you said it more succinctly and eloquently than I did, but I was trying to say the same thing.
Isn't that typical, Mr. Secretary?
I was trying to say the same thing, because I don't know I don't know what to do with that, right? Because I'm not granular enough.
Mr. Secretary, if I might.
Mr. Commissioner.
One comment that I would make is with regard to what you had indicated, with a wider spread of improvements that are being done. I'll just refer the board back to the action that was taken several years ago to implement stop-the-spot improvements for a period of time to allow us to take a systemic improvement to many of these action items, whether it be run off the road, lane departure that we were having, and implementing rumble strips on a statewide basis, our intersection, our backplate and flashing yellow arrows, our pedestrian safety action plan that Mr. Cole has presented back to the board. Those are all universal applications that we're fixing in a broader sense to be able to help reduce the possibility of death and serious injury crashes from occurring. So we are actively doing that. This is absolutely an annual basis for the safety team to be able to review the safety data, dig into the numbers, do the root cause analysis that Mr. Brown and Secretary that you mentioned to better identify what is the causation. And to your point, many of these crashes are very interrelated, that we see drugged or drug driving or intoxicated driving, impaired driving, seatbelts, not wearing seatbelts, speeding activities, and whether that be pedestrian related or run off the road related, lane departure, those are all intertwined. So today's briefing is to be able to highlight these are the results coming out of 2022. As Mr. Cole has indicated, we're going to be back in front of you a number of times this year. One fairly quickly on the target setting for next fiscal year or federal fiscal year, but also highlighting the effects, the projections.
Not say target settings, it just kills me.
But also be in a position where we're going to continue to highlight safety throughout the course of the year.
Well, I'm here to tell you we're going to dig and dig and dig deeper. But at the end of the day, what this board needs to fully understand in order for us to do what we should do is to segregate, is the root cause analysis, to segregate. Because listen, if every pedestrian getting killed, which is absurd to even think, is drunk in the middle of the road, that is a different issue than if it's something else, right? Or impaired in the middle of the road. And if everyone that's getting killed is going 25 miles over the speed limit without a seatbelt, we know what that is. But we just don't know on this how to get there.
Secretary, I think we talked about driver behavior of vehicles. I think we also need to add in that matrix pedestrians' behavior, because as you mentioned, and where I live, I see a lot of jaywalking going on. Instead of walking 50 more feet to go across at a lighted intersection that's marked and has proper signage. So I think that needs to be considered as well.
Well, yeah, we got equipment, we got behavior, we got design, we've got acts of nature. Absolutely got to look at all of them. So I don't want to keep saying the same thing over again, but we just got to understand better so we can try to attack it better.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and we look forward to the opportunity to discuss more of that root cause information with you in the future. So for each of those highlighted items on the previous slide, I've come with some summary level information that includes the 2022 fatality numbers as well as the 5-year period of fatality numbers. For this chart shows unbelted deaths in Virginia. So you can see over the 5-year period, we had just over 1,654 people in Virginia who died in traffic crashes. From the heat chart on the map, and the darker the color means more people died in that location as compared to the lighter color of the map. So you can see throughout the state, we had a number of unbelted deaths over the previous 5-year period.
And Mr. Cole, to the point earlier, it was even more illustrative if you showed it, this data, by like vehicle miles traveled in those jurisdictions. Because when you look at Pittsylvania County, or you look at Albemarle, or you look at Augusta, think about how much travel, how much road travel there is, and then you look at the percentages versus a Fairfax, it's going to jump out at you. That it's not only 37 and 37 and 39 people, but the percentages are going to be much higher, I think, which would draw your attention even more to that. And it sort of plays into the narrative that I see in some of my rural places, that a lot of folks in the rural areas don't wear seatbelts at the same rate as people that are. But in any case, I digress.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. And we do normally show also the rates by population and VMT. We did not have those for you today just due to the newness of the 2022 data, but that is something our team's working on now, and we'll have that.
VMT is probably more, predictive or more telling than just population. Because I mean, you could have an interstate go through a small populated area, but there's a ton of traffic, or a major highway.
Mr. Secretary, it would be helpful too if we saw how this changed over the time.
Yeah.
Are these the same counties that'll highlight some of those
Yeah, exactly.
offenders?
Is there a trend?
Yes, this is the word.
Right. Mr. Secretary, thank you. That's also another great comment, something we routinely do, and we'll be glad to bring that back to the board. This next slide is showing the speeding related deaths over the 5-year period through 2022. So just under 2,000 people died in speed-related traffic crashes throughout Virginia. Similar to the last map, this is the number of people, but we are working to show that trend by location over time, and also to add the rate information with it as well. This third slide shows the intersection deaths throughout the state over time. You can see by the bar chart on the left the large increase we did see in 2022, and these crashes are generally more focused in our more urbanized counties and cities throughout the state. And then the last map I have for you today is the pedestrian fatality map. So over the 5-year period that ended in 2022, 657 people died while walking on the roads in Virginia. You can see from the bar chart the big increase in 2022 that we're digging into the details now. What we see year in and year out here is the vast majority of our pedestrian deaths, as you might expect, occur in our Northern Virginia, Richmond, and Hampton Roads areas. But we do have pedestrian deaths throughout the state in the more rural areas as well, particularly in towns.
Secretary.
Yes, sir.
Question
Merrill.
for Mr. Cole. And is there double counting in these numbers? So for a pedestrian who is killed at an intersection, would they be counted in the pedestrian fatality and in the intersection fatality?
So it is possible that actually a number of our intersection crashes that are deaths are also pedestrians. So that is an area of overlap. About 2/3 of our pedestrian deaths occur not at an intersection, and about 1/3 occur within the limits of the intersection. So when you look big picture at what type of traveler is involved in a fatal or serious injury crash on our road system, in 2022, 71% of the traffic deaths in the state were motorists, 17% were pedestrians, 11% were motorcyclists, and 1% were bicyclists. And on the right, you can see the similar numbers for serious injuries. So more motorists in that serious injury category because there's just much less protection for a motorcyclist, bicyclist, or pedestrian if they're involved in a crash. And I share this information in part because in the new federal bill, there is a vulnerable road user rule. We call it VRU for short. Vulnerable road users are defined as persons who are walking or cycling on the road system. And what that special rule says is if the number of vulnerable road users who die in your state is equal to or greater than 15% in a calendar year, the state is required to obligate at least 15% of their safety funds on projects that address vulnerable road user safety. Each March, Federal Highway sends us the determination for how we did. And based on the 2022 data, we anticipate that we will trigger this rule. It will require us to obligate 15% of our safety funds in fiscal year 2025 for pedestrian and bicycle safety projects. What I also wanted to let you know is for a number of years we've invested at least 15% of our safety funds in pedestrian safety and bicycle safety projects. So we don't anticipate this is going to cause us any major issues. We have these projects in the 6-year plan and we're ready to obligate those. We're moving forward. But I did want you to be aware of this as we had received a couple of questions about this rule and whether or not we would trigger it.
Can I ask a question
Mr.
that's
Brown.
somewhat unrelated? Are there certain, for example, highways, are pedestrians allowed or cyclists allowed to bike or walk interstates? They're not, right? So are we seeing any correlation between pedestrians being in locations, circa your experience recently, where pedestrians are on roads or highways where arguably it's not safe and they shouldn't be? I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
going fishing here a little bit, but
Behavior
yeah.
versus a bad design versus a bad safety protocol versus, and you attack that a different way, right?
Right.
Mr. Secretary, that's a great question, Mr. Brown. About 10% of our pedestrian deaths each year are on the interstate system. Many times it's related to a breakdown or someone on the interstate that shouldn't be on the interstate on foot trying to cross. But about 10% of our pedestrians die on the interstate. The vast majority of our pedestrians die on the primary system. And it's generally the wider roads at the edge of the city or in that suburban area that's a little bit higher speed. That's what the data shows. And as you might expect, about 95% of pedestrians die when they're trying to cross the road. So we, of course, we build a lot of sidewalks, but we also pay a lot of attention to crosswalks and crossing infrastructure where we know we have pedestrians. But that's a really good question.
Yeah. We're going to get there, Mr. Brown.
So I wanted to take a couple of minutes to just remind the board that over the last couple of years, we've shifted our highway safety funding strategy and really focused on lower cost but high benefit safety projects that because they're lower cost, we can do these in a number of locations and it really helps us reduce crashes over time. So we're well into deploying the first 8 safety countermeasures. We have finished the high visibility traffic signal backplates and the first round of flashing yellow arrow. And we're well underway with the curve project, the pedestrian crossing project, and others that you see here. But really the goal of this is to identify locations on the road that have high risk factors for severe crashes and then deploy these treatments that we expect over time are going to help us turn the tide of some of these numbers.
And to the point I was looking at, it was some incident or some incidents, and we put the yellow sign there. That changed the trend line. And do we know if it changed the trend line? And if it didn't change the trend line, why do we think it didn't? And then what do we do from there? I mean, it's almost, and I know y'all are doing this, but I don't even have it, but I don't think we have it as a board. It's almost you got to look at all 1,000, every single one individually, and say, what could have prevented this? Now, if it's a bad design on the road, that could have prevented it. If it was somebody with terrible behavior, that's a whole different matter how you prevent that. But almost one by one, what could we have done in retrospect? Was there no crosswalk for 38 blocks and somebody crossed somewhere? Was there, whatever it is? And then what do we do about that? Because somebody being drunk and not wearing their seatbelt is a totally different issue, right? It takes a totally different solution. And I just sort of grapple with how much of it is one versus the other because we see a chart like that and I can't discern out of it how to fix that problem. So we'll get there. I'm not expecting you to tell me today, but we're going to, Mr. Brown, to your point, we're going to dig into this because we got to have our own view, and I need to be convinced as well that we really understand what's happening and we really have good strategies to try to keep that to change that curve.
And if I can just, we've been funding a lot of crosswalks in the Richmond district over the last couple of rounds. And I was actually just at an intersection the other day where I noticed, this is in kind of northern eastern Henrico, where I noticed more people than I'd typically seen trying to cross a 3-lane intersection. But I was happy to see that we actually had a crosswalk sign there and what have you. And I kind of was a little surprised because I hadn't remembered it being there. But I think it was a fairly new installation. But this is where it directly correlates, for example, how we score, what we rank, what we prioritize. And if we can, for example, I'm noticing that Henrico is one of those communities it's number 3 on the list.
Yeah.
Right? So that would have been, I would have loved to have known that 90 days ago. I was looking at these projects, but I think many of ours got funded. But that's just an example of how taking this data and understanding can directly correlate to how we use these dollars to have an impact on something that matters to people's lives in a real present way. So.
Thank you. Oh. Yes, sir. Mr. Kasparitz.
So, Mr. Secretary, we're looking at a situation where in a single year, we had pedestrian fatalities increase over 40%. I think that should create some urgency in the actions that we take. I appreciate your perspective that we should dig in and ultimately take action, but can you define that with a bit more specificity and give us some timeframes on what constitutes digging in and when we might hear back and be in a position as a board to take actions on what I think is just a very urgent issue? And I'll emphasize that the urgency of this is exacerbated by the fact that our state legislature has eliminated jaywalking violations, which will be a contributing factor, in my view, to further pedestrian accidents simply because there's no requirement in the Commonwealth of Virginia that we cross at crosswalks at this point. So just looking for some specificity and some, I guess, timing and sense of urgency in that timing as to the actions we might take.
Well, I just brought this up about 4 minutes ago, Mr. Kasparitz, so I'm not prepared to give you the specificity that you're looking for at this moment, but I'll be happy to to give it to you very shortly.
Would that be before the next meeting, sir, or at the next meeting?
It'll be very shortly.
Thank you.
Cole.
Mr. Secretary, thank you. The last couple of slides before I turn things over to Ms. Jennings, wanted to give you an overview of the highway safety work we have underway, working to address pedestrian safety projects and then intersection projects. So in 2019, in December of 2019, the board approved the Systemic Pedestrian Crossing Initiative, Phase 1. That has $34 million that we're using to add pedestrian crossings at approximately 500 traffic signals across the state. We're currently working our way through that as we speak, and we're at 24% complete. Then in December 2021, the board added another $20 million for up to 200 crossings, and these are really focused not on signalized intersections, but corridors between those larger intersections, and making sure we have pedestrian crossings on high-risk corridors. And then finally, last month in 2023, the board approved about $40 million for our locality partners to implement pedestrian safety projects, all focused on pedestrian crossings where our data shows we have safety issues. So those projects will be moving forward as well.
Mr. Secretary,
Ms. Hines.
I just really commend this. The zebra crossings, in my view, in urbanized areas provide not only a safe crossing place, but they're very good at night to help drivers, because the person walking across the zebra interrupts the zebra. And so you have a shot as a driver to recognize that someone is in that intersection, in that crossing. And I do know in my part of the world, it has made a huge difference in being able to see pedestrians at night. So I'm really excited about this. And the only other observation I would just make, and I'll make it publicly, is that on some very wide roads, we've found that we need to put a fence in the median to make sure that people don't cross where they're not supposed to cross. And I don't know if that's something that can be part of this. You kind of have to analyze each location. I'm not saying it's a silver bullet, but it can really help to reduce the amount of jaywalking, and it's a modest investment that saves lives.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Cole.
Mr. Secretary, this slide shows our investments in intersection safety projects over the last couple of years. In that 2019 board action, it included $14.4 million for high visibility traffic signal backplates. We completed those about a year ago and have started our evaluation, our after evaluation, to see how those are performing. It also included almost $11 million for flashing yellow arrow left turn signals on the traffic signal system. We completed all of those that did not require a signal rebuild, and those have been done about a year. We're starting evaluation. And it also included almost $25 million for VDOT unsignalized intersection improvements, and this is signing and pavement markings. We're 30% completed with that, and we're focused on about 1,500 intersections that we identified through data analysis as higher risk intersections, and that work is ongoing. Then in December 2021, the board approved almost $16 million for additional flashing yellow arrow signals. We know these to be effective, and this money is helping us address the locations that required a more extensive rebuild of the traffic signal. And then finally, last month, the board approved $20 million for our localities to use for intersection improvement projects as well. So all these infrastructure projects are moving forward to address highway safety. At this time, I want to invite up Ms. Angelisa Jennings. She's the Deputy Director of DMV's Highway Safety Office, and she's going to talk about DMV's work on the education and behavioral side.
Morning. Welcome.
Morning, Mr. Chair, members of the board.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for letting me be here today. The first slide that you see is a brief high-level overview of the $10 million in funding we received from the board in September of 2022. As you can see, we have expended about $71,000 so far, with $3.3 million earmarked between now and the summer to be spent on different media strategies. We have a remaining $6.6 million that we will be planning for starting in April in a couple of weeks. The funding so far has been used on several media strategies. I'm sure several of you have heard the Ding Ding commercial. If you've been riding in your car, that's the safety belt campaign. That $860,000 has been earmarked, and it's being placed now this month. You'll hear it all the month of March. Additionally, we have the Safe Driving is Something We Can All Live With campaign, where we put out about $262,000. That campaign is also running throughout the entire month of March as well. And we have placed social media messaging in the amount of about $6,500, starting in November of 2022 and running through February of 2023. For impaired driving, as you can see, our Safe Driving campaign addresses occupant protection, impaired driving, as well as speeding. So that's going to continue to run in the month of March with an additional $524,000 that has been earmarked. And an additional $6,500 will also be earmarked starting in March. That's not there, but it's going to be added. In the prevention of speeding, we have new creatives on a media buy that we've obligated about $1.4 million to begin at the end of the summer. We've conducted a speed focus group, spending about $46,000. That was done in February. Those results are being tallied now, and we should have that information next month. And we will be using that information to do Creative Source Speed program. Again, our Safe Driving campaign is running throughout March, and additional social media messaging will also be running throughout March. For pedestrian bike, social media messaging again, that includes Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. And we have released 7 news releases that was covered by 19 media outlets statewide.
Mr. Secretary?
Ms. Hines.
Ma'am, are you spending a million plus on the safe driving is something we can all live with, so that each time you've mentioned that those numbers roll up? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And the remaining, like I said, we have $6.6 million remaining, and DMV will utilize those remaining funds. We're going to work with our media partner as well as our communications office and the highway safety staff to develop additional creative strategies. And we're also going to roll in young drivers and pedestrians within that media.
Mr. Secretary?
Ms. Hines.
Thanks very much for giving us this update. I keep wondering about how we'll know if we've moved the needle.
What's success? How do we know success, right?
Right. And I feel like people are so inundated with messages, both on social media and television and radio, et cetera. And partly what I think we need is some visible changes, right? We need more pedestrians who put on a vest that is reflective. We need people to buckle up. And I just wonder if there's, and I don't even know if these monies can be used for something like that. So I'm like out there on a limb, but I really think in this area of pedestrian safety that if we had some incentives, or if every time you bought a bike, you were given for 6 months a free reflective vest, courtesy of the state of Virginia, maybe we would start to see in some places people changing their behavior a little bit. It's harder to get at pedestrians, but you could also work in high schools with kids who go through driver ed and say, we're going to give you your license and we're also going to give you a walking vest and a biking vest. So I just, it's a lot of money that we're deploying here without a lot of assurance that we're actually going to see changed behavior or, so anyway, I'll be quiet, but that's really my concern.
Well, there is a science to this, Ms. Hines, and I'm not the scientist. And it's sort of like the vest, there's science to that too, right? How many people are going to wear the vest? What are they going to do? I don't know the answer, but they're great questions to ask. And so really I think the first thing you said was exactly what I've been thinking. How do we measure the success of the $6.7 million that we're going to spend on remaining balance and the total $10 million? How do we know that we're being successful? At the end of the day, we want to bend the curve, right? But if we're getting to people and they're understanding the message and they're beginning to take action, you may not see that bend for a little bit of time. And I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know the question. And maybe 10 million is not enough. I mean, we spend a lot of money in transportation. Maybe it needs to be 50 million. I mean, I don't know the right number, but to Mr. Kasperitz's point, sir, I think we're focused on it. And I think we need to figure it out and do more than we're doing, or at least understand what we think we need to do and what it takes to do that. At the end of the day, I just anecdotally think that the toughest part here is the driver behavior piece. It's the person behavior piece, the driver, the pedestrian, the biker. That's the hard part to change. I mean, we can engineer and we can see those things and they're discrete and we know where they are and we can do something, and we've done that. But how do you get a 20-year-old knucklehead boy like I was to put on the seatbelt, or to not drink 3 beers and get in a car, or whatever it is? We know our target group, we've seen this before, it's not in this presentation, but the age isn't in here either. It's only the older driver that's in here. But we sort of know in law enforcement, our target age is between 18 and 30 boys. That's the target group. And I hate to generalize, but that's what the data says. So I don't know the answer of how you do that, how you change that behavior. I will tell you, and I'll be quiet, but I'll never forget driver's ed in the 10th grade and watching the movies that they showed us. One was called Signal 30. It would get your attention when you saw the movie. And sometimes, you need some shock value to get people to see reality. Again, we've got design things, and we've got acts of nature, and we've got behavior. I think we sort of get the design thing. I'm not sure we're passionately getting how to do the behavior thing. But we're going to work on it. My thought is that we might have a subcommittee that really dives into this with y'all's help, and something would be cross-agency, and get the state police involved with us, have a working group with DMV and with VDOT. And anybody else that would make sense, to really try to drive an understanding and have a plan of how to go forward. Thank you. Yes, sir, Mr. Coleman.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I wonder, I'm relatively new on the board, but do we have any people outside? In other words, when we do these projects, are we just shooting that we think that this is going to help? And I think the idea that's come out several times about evaluation, validation of the money spent, are you getting a return? But, I don't know.
No, we're not shooting in the dark, Mr. Coleman, but I do think the behavioral piece is hard to
Well,
hard to measure.
That's to my point. Are we engaging with anybody that specifically deals with behavior science? And I talked a little bit to Laura about this, and she thinks it's a waste of money, but I don't know if it would. But to give us a better idea that the money we're spending is actually being recommended by people that study behavior.
Mr. Cole, you want to speak to any of that? Or y'all want to speak to any of that? I mean, the advertising people that we talk to are about behavior. They're about, that's what advertising does, is it tries to drive behavior, right? So in theory, we are incorporating that. Did we do it enough? I can't answer. But I don't think we're just shooting in the dark.
Well, I think to Mr. Kasperowitz, Scott's mentioned earlier is that we think can affect behavior, but if we don't measure the results in some meaningful way, then we don't know if we're getting what
I don't know how to measure the behavior reasonably other than the statistics of the outcomes. It would be an incredibly daunting task to think that somehow we're going to measure change across Virginia's population of their behavior by doing anything other than looking at the results. Are there less fatalities or are there more fatalities?
I think he brought up, too, the enforcement of it, because we've taken away the code that allows police officers to jaywalking.
That's not the problem.
Not a
I mean,
problem.
it really isn't. How many jaywalking tickets do you think changed?
Well, I don't know.
That's what I would tell
That's
you.
what I'm saying.
I'm not a behavioral
scientist.
The enforcement problem that we have is a combination of a social decision in some cases, like not chasing people, not a social decision, a safety decision. In some cases, not to chase people and do this and that. But we're way down in every law enforcement. Buyers, help me here. We're way down. We're so undermanned everywhere. I mean, the city of Norfolk is like, 1/3 undermanned. The state police is woefully undermanned, and everybody's trying to get more people. So you know what happens? The enforcement goes down. They're trying to respond to more serious situations, and the enforcement of these things goes down.
Well, I know accountability helps. As a kid, my father's speeches to me affected my behavior. So there was accountability, and I think that's where we may be lacking. It's my personal opinion.
Sure. Kasperowitz.
This is a hard one to assess, Mr. Secretary, but my question would be, would that $10 million be better spent on bringing more troopers on or funding speed enforcement programs within existing law enforcement organizations around the Commonwealth? I mean, it's questions hard to determine, but,
And I don't even know that we can
dollars are scarce.
Don't know that we can fund law enforcement with these dollars.
Secretary, I don't think it's a waste of money, but I think the value proposition, you have to think about it. Again, human behavior is quite complex. And if it was just enforcement, we wouldn't put people in jail multiple times in their lifetimes. We wouldn't remove their children. We wouldn't have to tell people, if you continue this behavior, you'll die, right? And so humans are incredibly complex. And could we spend it elsewhere? I don't know. When it comes to law enforcement, many of these positions are funded. They're just not filled. So that's a totally different conversation of why can't we fill these and how do we do it? But yeah, judging human behavior and seeing changes in behavior are just very, very tough. And it changes my behavior when I hear that ding ding commercial, I change the channel. And so you do, it's what is the behavior we want us to see, right?
Mr. Secretary,
Hopefully.
has there been consideration, or is there flexibility to do what we used to call in our business small tests of change, as opposed to trying to blanket the whole healthcare system with the behavioral change? We tried to introduce behavioral changes in small subsets of the organization. So instead of spreading these dollars across the entire Commonwealth, if the root cause analysis and human factor analysis showed that we have high concentrations of traffic fatalities in Northern Virginia due to pedestrian crosswalks, well, what about putting the whole squeeze in one particular jurisdiction and seeing can the needle move to prove that these are the interventions that work, as opposed to these, blanket, broad-based, statewide investments that are going to have a very small impact on a large population as opposed to a larger impact on a smaller population.
I would tell you, I think there's more targeting in the safety improvements than you're giving them credit for. On this piece, the behavioral piece, I don't know that it's specific to a region or geography. I doubt that it probably is, but maybe it is. I don't know. I mean, on your safety improvements, your sidewalk improvements, I mean, they're like most of our things, we're looking at where we think they're needed, right? We're not just putting them down there. We're where they needed. My earlier comments were, and Mr. Commissioner, you can help me to understand if this is accurate here or not, but in some of the signalization comments I made, and I'm totally uneducated or fully uneducated about it. But it was suggesting you needed to have a certain number of incidents before you could fix. And, if I'm an engineer, if I'm a safety engineer, highway engineer, whatever the proper engineer is that would look at these things and say, this is a bad design, this is likely to create a problem, I don't know why you have to wait for the problem to happen to fix the problem, or for the result to occur before you fix the problem. To me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. What it would do is draw your attention to some place that perhaps you didn't know was a problem, and then you'd say, aha, look at this, it's a problem, let's go fix it. But if I'm seeing it's a problem and I can't do anything because I got some regulation, and we need to be more thoughtful than that, in my view.
Mr. Secretary, I'd say that the systemic improvements that have been applied statewide are based upon proven countermeasures that have the longevity of being put into place, measuring their effectiveness, and there's a return on that investment. And so those highest and best use cases, one we picked out for Mark, the 6 or 8 emphasis areas that we've identified, and identified the worst of the worst that we could implement on a statewide basis. If we implemented that on a county by county basis, which it started out being, of available funds in a particular construction district, we start violating motorist expectations of what they're going to see when they travel from Augusta to Albemarle or to Virginia Beach. And we have a lot of people that transient between the counties. Doing this in a universal manner, in a systemic manner that's ubiquitous across the Commonwealth, our motorists are going to enter an intersection and see the same backplate or see the same flashing yellow arrow, and it's not going to be from one location to another. So we wanted to make sure that motorist expectations were clearly set as we deploy these types of countermeasures out there. And again, these do have proven returns on the investment. As far as if we know that there is something that has changed from a standard that is being put into place, or that was put into place maybe in the 70s, we're working through that, and that's where some of the systemic improvements are coming into place, that we're upgrading almost, 400 intersections with pedestrian safety action plans that are taking that and upgrading those today. So I do think that we're on that trend, and we're working through that. And Mark does, part of the safety team's evaluation, does on an annual basis look at what was implemented 3-4 years ago, and does the before and after evaluation to be able to help identify, was that a good return on the investment? I do share, Mr. Secretary, then your thoughts about maybe a subcommittee and being able to drill down into this, because I do share the same response that is the money on the behavioral side most appropriately being spent? Is there opportunity for enforcement activities using that overtime? Our troopers are stretched out, but I think we could come to a realization of an opportunity to be able to bend that needle, as you say, and look to what can we do with the resources that we have to drive safety.
Let me say one other thing, and we're going to wrap this up, but we're going to not leave it. 25, I think it's 25% of the smart scale projects are bike ped projects, 25%. And we're in that business for two reasons. One is because there's some demand for it, and the other is because there's some direction to do it. Meaning, it's not that we've got a gazillion bikers with no bike lanes. That's not what I see in most of the places I go. That's not been the history over the last 10 or 15 years. We got all these bikers and they got nowhere to go, and so we're doing bike lanes to accommodate them. That's not what I've seen. What I've seen is, in most places, that we're using bike lanes because we want people to bike as opposed to be in a car. We want to be environmentally sensitive. And so as we've built these things to get people to use them, and there are more bikers and there are more pedestrians, expect more problems or less problems, and I would expect more problems. Sort of feeding it in to ourselves as we do that. And the problem becomes, for me, as I see it, as a engineer, non-scientist, non-behavioral person, we paint some lines on a road, right? And we put some triangles in it, or a bicycle in it, or whatever, and we say, bike lane, safe, get in the bike lane. Well, it's segregated at least visually. That's some help. But if you get a lot of new bikers in there, and you didn't have them before, I would tell you it's a more unsafe situation than you had before, because you got more people, more bikers in an unsafe sort of situation. It's safer than nothing, but it's not very safe. And you get to a stoplight, and you're stopping there, and the biker's 3 feet behind the front of your car, or 4 feet behind the front of your car, and you don't even see them, and you go to turn right, or they're going down the highway, and they're sort of in the road, and you're in your blind spot, and you go to turn right, and we're not used to turning right across bike lanes because we're not used to that. We weren't trained for that. In 1973, when I got my license, that was not part of the protocol, and they haven't told me anything since then, by the way. And so we're sort of feeding into our own problem. And if it was me, I think we got to be serious about looking at the stuff that we're funding and say, are we funding it safely? If you had a physical barrier, I'd feel a lot better about it, right? But we don't. Most cases, we just have a line. Some cases, we got a plastic bollard, all those things, post-mounted tubular delineators. And so we're going to put more money into that. We're going to put more lanes, more bikers. Where do you think we're going to have more problems or less problems? If we don't do anything else, we're going to have more problems. So we better figure out how to do it safe. If we're going to do it, then we better figure out how to do it safely so that as we're doing it, we're not creating problems for everybody. And I think that we are, frankly. You get this sort of maybe false sense of security. And I've been hit on a bike, T-boned. I flew, and it hurt. All right? I was lucky that I wasn't seriously hurt, but I was seriously hurt for a few days. And it's not a good situation. I understand. Thank God I wasn't killed or seriously injured, but I know what I understand when a explorer runs a stop sign and hits you square in the side. It's not a good situation. And I was doing everything I was supposed to do. It was somebody who blew through a stop sign. That simple. In any case, we're gonna work on it in a much more attentive way at this level. And hopefully, over the next numbers of months, we'll have a little bit better idea of what we can do to help you to bend this curve, because we just got to do something.
Secretary, I got just a couple of questions real quick. Mr. Cole, We said change in fatalities by emphasis area. What do you say 2021 value and 2022 value? What do you mean by 21? What do you mean by value?
So that's the number of people who died related to that emphasis area in that year. So the 2021 value is the number of people who died for speeding.
The word
or
is used,
for unbelted.
instead of died, you put value.
Just erase value and
Okay.
look at it as
The other question
2022.
is, young driver involved. What is the age, when you say young driver involved, what age? Do you say under 18? What age factor do you use?
It's young.
Young driver involved, I believe, is 20 years old or younger.
20 years old. How about age in road?
65 years old or older.
Okay, and alcohol related, is that drug related, involved in that too?
Alcohol related is alcohol related. Drug related numbers, I can let Angelisa speak to that, but it's different.
Different? Separate, so that's not on here.
That's not on there, no, sir.
So there's drug related fatalities not on this analysis? Okay. A lot of people use more drugs and have accidents, something, alcohol probably. And heavy vehicle involved, is that tractor trailers?
Yes, that's larger commercial vehicles.
All right, specifically, I was going to ask something as being a non-Northern Virginian. I've seen recently at Fairfax, VDOT's been under some criticism in Fairfax County for a high number of fatalities, for pedestrians. I mean, how much mileage in Fairfax County? We know it's the largest population in the state. How many
Lane miles?
lane miles?
I don't know.
All right, I say that because the pedestrians mostly, I don't know if you got the information or not, in Fairfax County, is it like non-crossover accidents or?
Mr. Dodson, I think that's the point of the whole conversation.
Wait,
we've been having.
I'm telling you where I'm going with this.
We don't know the answers, right?
I know, well, I'm trying to get, I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about something specifically. When you do the outreach, do you do it in Spanish?
Yes, we
Like when I go to Northern Virginia, and I drive at night a lot, now I don't live there, but I spend a lot of time there. There's a number, you can say Hispanic people from Mexico, Central America, whatever, and once of us have been to Mexico.
Spanish speakers, just Spanish speakers.
Spanish
Bert.
speakers, okay, wait, my wife, don't worry, my wife's
Doesn't
Mexican
matter
American.
where they're from.
Okay, fine, wait, you're not listening to me, okay?
Fine, so let him.
So what I'm trying to get to is this. What I'm saying is this. A lot of countries, they don't have cars as much as we do. They walk, okay? So what happens is that my question to you, if you give a high lot of fatalities in Fairfax County, and it's very high Spanish speaking population, do you do a lot of outreach in Spanish? Because in the numbers that you have in like Fairfax County or Prince William County. Because what I'm trying to say, we're trying to hit the people, get the people using, crossing, getting hit or killed. Now, we ain't talking about people who get hurt. You're talking about people getting killed.
We do have a company that translates all of our documents into Spanish.
Do y'all use it extensively?
that we put out.
Well, I'm not talking about the whole state. I'm just talking about Fairfax County. Y'all use it a lot in Fairfax County?
That I would have to find.
Okay, I'm just saying, if you got a problem,
Yes.
if y'all been criticized, VDOT's been criticized recently, I read in the press about so many pedestrian deaths in Fairfax County, and if you have an issue, and I don't know what the demographics as far as people dying or getting hurt as far as pedestrians, but what I'm saying is that if you're going to communicate a message like don't do the crosswalk, and you only do it in English, when people are not bilingual and not knowing English or Spanish like that, then you have more issues. That's just a suggestion. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dodson. Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much. More to come. Next item on the agenda is item 3, Economic Development Access Program for Montgomery County and Falling Branch Corporate Park Phase 2. Sir.
Mr. Secretary,
Mr. Short.
members of the board. I'm Terry Short. I'm the Assistant Division Director with the Local Assistance Division.
Welcome.
I'm here today to present an Economic Development Access Program application for the Falling Branch Corporate Park in Montgomery County. Just to provide a brief overview of the EDA program, the program provides funding support to create and/or update existing road networks to serve economic development sites. This is a state-funded program administered by VDOT's Local Assistance Division, and applications are accepted on a rolling basis. Projects can be what we call traditional projects, meaning that those are projects that have a known user and sufficient capital investment known, or a bonded project, which are projects where a known user has not yet been identified, but the grant is made through a surety provision offered by the locality. The proposed EDA project in Montgomery County will be a bonded project. So this provides just a little bit more information specific to bonded projects. A bonded economic development access project provides allocations to localities that either, one, do not have a user under contract for the site, or two, when a qualifying establishment is being held for the purpose of confidentiality. In these circumstances, the governing body must guarantee to the board that a surety will be provided to cover the anticipated cost of the project. The locality then has 5 years from the date of board approval of the funding to deliver the required private capital investment or be subject to repayment. The program provides up to $700,000 in unmatched state funds, plus an additional $150,000 in matched state funds, which require a dollar-for-dollar match by the locality. Located in southwest Christian, the park is about 2 miles from I-81 and about 1.5 miles from US Highway 460. Falling Branch Corporate Park has achieved a Tier 4 status under the Virginia Economic Development Partnership and their Virginia Business Ready Sites program. By reaching a Tier 4 status, the site is certified as business ready. In short, a Tier 4 or Tier 5 is prepared and positioned for selection and development by economic development projects. The Virginia Business Ready Sites program is built around a tier level process, meaning from a ranking of 1 to 5, 1 being completely raw land, and Tier 5 is pad ready with full infrastructure and permits in place for development. To meet the minimum certification requirements for a Tier 4, the site must meet the following requirements. They must be listed on the VDP website, zoned industrial, all due diligence has been completed, and all infrastructure improvements are in place, or plans for infrastructure improvements are completed and approved and deliverable within 12 to 18 months. Again, this project request is for a bonded EDA project. Montgomery County has allocated funding for both grading and extending utilities to the site. The project itself will extend Parkway Drive further into the site. I'll show an exhibit here in just a moment. Construction will include a 30-foot wide access road that's about 1/2 mile in length with sidewalks and street lighting, and will serve the last remaining 35-acre site within the corporate park. The county has provided a total project estimate of $2.1 million to deliver the project and are seeking $700,000 in unmatched funding and $150,000 in matched dollar-for-dollar funding, similar to revenue sharing, for a total state funds allocation of $850,000. Both the Salem District and Christiansburg residency staff have reviewed and concurred with that project estimate. Here's just a quick illustration of the site plan and the concept. As you can see, the new access road will extend from the existing Parkway Drive and provide access to Lot 2. Again, that is the last remaining site of the development, and the ED program has actually participated in providing all of the road access to the parcels as the site has been developed. As some of you may recall, we recently began a scoring process for the evaluation of these projects prior to coming to the board. The projects must receive at least 50 points to be considered for funding. Next, the site is anticipated to generate private capital investment, in this instance of $3.4 million, or 4 times the project allocation. VDP anticipates that this site will attract an employer who will create up to 50 jobs and offers a high potential for development activity. Montgomery County is currently designated as a single distressed locality by VDP's Commonwealth Opportunity Fund, and the county is also designated as a poverty distressed community, which means that it has a poverty rate above the state average. So in conclusion, the project scored very well, and we believe it's a good investment for the taxpayers. So next steps would involve bringing this back to the board at your next meeting for consideration at the April meeting. And if approved by the board, VDOT and Montgomery County would then enter into a state aid agreement with the county administering the project. So with that, if there are any questions, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Shore. Are there any questions? Thank you very much. Have a great day. Next item on the agenda is item 4, the smart scale budget increase. Ms. Kim Pryor. Hydraulic Road and Route 29.
Sure. Good morning. Today I'm bringing to you a smart scale budget increase for the Hydraulic Road and Route 29 improvement project. As a reminder, your board policy on smart scale requires board approval of certain cost increases or smart scale budget increases based on the thresholds shown on the slide. The Hydraulic Road and Route 29 improvement project was submitted by the Charlottesville Albemarle MPO in round 4 of smart scale, which would have been FY22. The original project cost was $24 million. The request was 5.7 of the $24 million, and we funded it with high priority funds. The original scope of the project included several elements targeted at safety and mobility, as well as pedestrian and transit improvements, a roundabout at the intersection of Hillsdale and Hydraulic, as well as several operational improvements. The project benefits were primarily associated with safety and also land use. If you're wondering why this sounds familiar, it should. You approved a budget increase for this project in October. There was a smart scale budget increase of about 74%. In terms of the entire project budget, which was much larger than just the smart scale budget, it was an 18% increase. Several factors contributed to that, as presented to you in October, primarily right-of-way costs, some design changes to improve safety and traffic operations, as well as updated unit costs and inflation. The district did work with the county, the city, and the MPO to make several modifications to the scope, and ultimately determined that additional modifications wouldn't achieve any more cost savings and would in fact reduce the effectiveness of the project. Since you approved that budget increase, VDOT has received bids and determined that those price proposals are responsive and represent good competition. There is an additional budget increase required to award the project of $1.3 million. This represents a total increase to the total budget of about 23%. For the smart scale budget alone, it's a 96% increase. Major factors contributing to that shortfall include material and labor availability in the area. There's a lot of construction going on, as well as higher than anticipated costs for some of the lighting features and complexities related to the location of the project. It's a high volume corridor, some construction time restrictions, and some sequencing restrictions in the project. This chart shows the change from the original application to the October approved budget increase, and finally to today with the recommended increase, bringing the total project cost to $29.5 million. Total smart scale budget, bringing that to $11.2 million, which is an increase of 1.3 over the October change. It changes the score to 14.7. It does not change the ranking of the project. Originally, this project was number 1 in the cohort. It's now number 4. I'll be bringing an action item to you later today to approve this budget request, or request approval of the budget request, because we need to award the project prior to the April board meeting. This budget increase would be funded from the high priority project balances. There's about $13 million available today, surpluses on previous projects. This would take $1.3 million of that and leave a remaining balance of $11.5 million. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Secretary.
Mr. Merrill.
Thank you, Ms. Pryor, very thorough. Is there any reason why the local jurisdiction is not going to contribute any of the cost increase? It appears from the presentation, the original project was $24 million, final 29.5, $5.5 million. It's all coming from smart scale.
So the project was originally submitted by the MPO, not the city or the county. The project crosses into both jurisdictions. There's a considerable amount of non-smart scale funding on it that both the city and the county worked previously. It's old legacy money that predates smart scale. So no, they're not bringing additional funding at this point to the project. There is legacy money on it that they coordinated with the department and the board in previous years to acquire for the project.
Is that your answer?
I was just curious that the entire delta is being
We're taking the whole enchilada.
taken on. Why don't the
increase.
jurisdictions or the MPO find some other sources to help offset the entire 5.5?
Let me just
Mr.
point out
Yates.
that we talk a lot about safety and pedestrians. This is extremely, especially for pedestrians. Growth in this area is phenomenal. Low construction costs. Well worthy of.
What round was this in?
Round 4.
Secretary,
Yes, sir, Dr. Smoot.
what determines whether a project is submitted by the MPO or by a local government?
It's a lot of times it's coordination within the region to determine if the project is a regional priority. In many cases, the MPO will submit it. In this case, because the project crosses multiple localities, they probably determined it was most appropriate for the MPO to submit it as a regional project.
Thank you.
We have got to find a way to get out of this situation. We talked about this for years. We talked about round one, round two. We weren't so good at it, and we're getting better. And here we are in a round 4 application. Now, obviously, every year has its own, every round has its own complexities. COVID and inflation and da-da-da-da-da for this round. And I don't not think the project should be done, but I think Mr. Merrill's point's a good one. Always mother. Where's the love from the MPO? Why is it that every additional dollar needs to come from us as opposed to some sort of sharing or some sort of contribution? I think Mr. Merrill would probably feel better if there was some. Others might feel the same, but it does, at the end of the day, I think what you showed us in the chart is that if the number had been that number then, we'd run the numbers and run the scoring system, we would have funded it at that level. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So from a retrospective standpoint, if we'd known all that then, we'd have done that then, and we wouldn't have had the same angst that we'd have now. But that's not the way it's happening, and it's every time we're going back, and it's almost like we need to have almost makes us think you need a bigger reserve, hold more smart scale back, because our estimating is not keeping up with reality, whether that's because of design changes or inflation or availability or whatever it might be. The fact is we too often are not keeping up with what ultimately we face. And so now we're going backwards and saying, I need more, I need more. It's not just the money, it's the disruptive process and the sort of uncertainty. Every time you decide to do something, it's really not the way it is that creates the angst. So I would tell my colleagues that I suffer the angst, but I'm also cognizant that if we'd done this originally in round 4, we would have voted for it and we'd have moved on and we'd never thought about it again. And we sort of have a practice that as we do this, we go back and look at that, and as long as that is the way it would have worked, then that's the way we'll continue to make it work. Always a little bit more dicey when you're in high priority because everybody's competing for that. But nonetheless, it would have worked that way. If we'd put that number down last time, it would have scored, we'd have funded it, and we wouldn't be out hearing from me talking about it on and on. So I'm going to be quiet. If anybody else has any other comments, be happy to hear them. Ms.
Mr.
Hines?
Secretary, could I just ask a question?
Yes, ma'am.
We've had several conversations over the last 6 or 8 months about the fact that material and labor costs are really going up. And we have done, we've set money aside a couple of times in various pots, and I can't remember, like, which pots.
How much and where?
Well, no, just even which pots they're about. I know there's some of it's about state of good repair, and maybe we have a proposal in round 5 to hold some back to cover us in this. I think part of what's hard about this particular one is 5 months ago we had already approved an increase, and so now we're back another time. But I think, you know, not for today, but maybe just for next month, a quick reminder of where we do have those pots that are for inflation and where we don't, or for the cost of labor and materials. Just to kind of give us all a context for that. And I think this whole issue of MPOs and localities and who's eligible for which funding is a worthy conversation for us to have when we come to the smart scale conversation.
Absolutely.
And how we treat these to make sure that we are getting great value for the decisions that we make. That would be my pin in it moving forward. But on this issue of where we've got backup and where we don't, and I know the policy says if it's over a certain percentage, they've got to come back, and I don't want to change that, but I would like to have some other things to talk about other than we're just draining HPP.
Ms. Sellers. Thank you, Ms. Hines.
Her discussion on the MPO versus locality, is it a statutory thing that MPOs only qualify for HPP funds, or is that a policy?
In the statute.
In the statute.
Yes, that's in the code.
All right, anyone else? Yes, Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Secretary, I'd echo what Ms. Hines had indicated about the estimates and the changing impacts of labor, commodities, and inflation overall. And as such, we're going through, barring outside of this particular one, this one, we recognized that there was an issue back in October before it went to advertisement. When we went to advertisement, this is the outcome of the advertisement in the current climate at that point in time. So even during this point in time between October and today, we're still seeing increases in our commodity costs, our labor costs that are going to start driving our bids that we are receiving. As such, we're taking in the 6-year plan and the updates, we're trying to get ahead of what inflation is going to have. So while we're doing our best to keep up with the current marketplace as it stands today, and back in October, Balmoral Group gave an overview of what we can expect, and we still saw an uptrend. We hadn't even reached what the many other states at the national level have reached at that point, so we were still achieving good bids. We're now starting to see a consolidation in our bid prices come much more closer that they're going to start exceeding, and our estimating is catching up. And so what I'm trying to say in a lot of words right now is that I'm thinking that in the next several months, we're likely going to see bid prices come in over estimates. We're going to see a need to update certain projects as they come before the board in the 6-year plan and ask for increases in those, and that's predominantly driven by the marketplace today and the inflation that we're seeing today. No one could have expected a CPI of more than 10% last June, and as I was driving in this morning, we're expecting a higher CPI than what we thought going into this next fiscal year. So this is a trend, we're keeping up with it, but just anticipate that we might be back in these positions that even 5 months, the marketplace could change in some of these critical locations. And as Kim had indicated, there are steps that are being taken to reduce the cost before it gets to this point so that we can bring the best value and a safe project to the board for action.
Let me just tie this up with one last thing. I think some people did predict the CPI 10%, but I'll leave that alone. Secondly, if we think today, Mr. Commissioner, that our bids in 5 months are going to be ahead of our estimates that we're making today by 5%, then I would say change the estimate by 5%. If we thought that, right? If we thought that. If we really think that today, then we ought to bake that in somehow, but I'll leave that to you. The last thing I'll say is the frustrating part to me, morning Bart, is not just the money and the inflation and all that, because I mean that's sort of out of our control. All we're trying to do is forecast it and project it. We don't create it. But we did this in October, and here we are in March. Factors contributing to the cost increase, and we don't tell you which ones or how much of the cost increase, but the one in the middle says design refinements to improve traffic flow and safety. We designed a project. We came back to this board in October and said we need $4.2 million more. Now we're coming back in March and saying we need $1.5 million more, and one of the things that we're talking about is the way I read it, is design refinements to improve traffic flow and safety, and nothing changed between October and March in the world. I cannot that happen. So if let's just pretend it's 50% of the cost increase. I'm making this number up. We should have known that. We should have designed it. I mean, help me understand why in October, after a submission and whenever it first was designed, that now we're saying some of this cost is additional design. That's what makes me anxious.
Makes me anxious too, sir.
That should be something within our control.
We have taken steps to offset what we think is coming. We took that in December by going through and redoing our estimates across the state. Sometimes we're seeing higher costs in higher areas, and that's something we can't control. And the labor.
We can't control any of it.
Yes, sir.
All we can do is try to project it.
Correct. We are trying to be in a proactive sense, but a lot of times we are more in a reactive sense. But labor and commodities are just something that fluctuate all over the state. So we continue to battle this, and we'll continue to battle it.
All I'm saying, Bart, is if everybody in this room today said, we firmly believe that in 6 months, all of that we're going to be 5% off of our CPI or inflation or whatever you want to call it. We really believe that today. I'm not saying we do, but if we did, I got an estimate of $100, I just changed it to 105. I ain't waiting for it. I'm not waiting for it to happen if I believe it today. Now, if I say 105 and it comes in at 101, I'm going to declare victory and go home. But if it's 105 and I said it's 100, I'm not going to be happy. I mean, it's just the human nature piece of this.
We have seen bids, sir, like this. I think those are probably in the minority.
I'm not going to get into specific. I was merely reacting to the commissioner's view, and I won't tell him that I don't agree with him because I probably do, that we're going to see more of this. And I'd just rather get ahead of it and overestimate the hit than underestimate the hit. Right. We did that, by the way, when we set aside the money Mary was talking about. We overestimated the impact, right? We set aside $120 million, and it came in at 80 or something. I mean, we overestimated it. But in my view, that was better than underestimating it substantially. And so we held some back, and we were able to use it later. And I'd rather do that. It's just easier to do, and it's safer, and it's, everything, it just works better. And so if we get that point, I just tell you, if you really believe that, put it in there. That's what I would say.
Understood, sir.
Mr. Secretary, I had a conversation with one of our jurisdictions recently where, and again, I know we're looking backward, right? These are projects that were
easy to do, isn't it?
That were round 3 and round 2, and round 4, and they did not, right? We had been in this low inflationary environment, low commodity prices for a decade, right? And no one believed that the world was round, and it is. However, I will say there are implications that we're kind of fighting the last war, because what my folks are telling me is that because of those lessons, now we're overlaying additional contingency on projects that were submitted in round 5 after the jurisdictions that are submitting those proposals have added contingency, because they are in their own economic world are also doing that.
We're doubling up, is that what you're saying?
And they're making the argument. I'm not saying I agree with them. I push back on them because I'm team VDOT CDB, right? I've got the T-shirt under. That in some cases we've added 50% contingency on projects that are in round 5 that had an implication in this going around. I don't know. I see Ms. Hines nodding her head. So I think some of these other jurisdictions may have also approached their board members saying, look, it's actually adversely influenced this scoring round. Now,
right.
I'm not, it is what it is, right? We have, it always happens this way. We're always fighting the last war when we're in the new war. But I think I want to caution this board and Mr. Our chief engineer here, and he's standing in there, he's taking this, but again, hindsight's 20/20. We have to accommodate what we're doing, and I think there's some things that we're going to do in our round. There are projects that we're going to cancel because the costs are going up and we can't figure it out, and those are lessons those are hits we're going to take. But I don't want us to overreact going forward such that we now significantly
loaded up too much.
Impact, right? So I just want to add that. So you're.
I hear you.
We've all heard you. We've all got our backsides are all smarting.
I hear you.
But okay.
Secretary.
It's an art and it's a balance.
Right.
Secretary, given the comments from the commissioner, which are not surprising, how much unobligated surplus do we have sitting in the kitty to bail out these projects?
Inspire. See, Bart can dance.
I know we might dance or something, sir.
You can dance backwards, actually. That's pretty good. I like that.
12 million. The funding available to address high priority cost increases is about 12 million right now. And each district has a balance entry of surplus funds from previous projects that we kind of use as a revolving account for that district to address cost increases.
So that would vary from district to district.
All that we have taken out 12% of the funding available for round 5 as a reserve in each district and the high priority pot to address cost increases on existing projects, which we're working through now, as well as the risk for cost increases on round 5 applications, since those estimates were largely prepared a couple of years ago.
Well, I guess I'm fine with bailing out this project and moving on, but it begins to raise the question, if we think we're going to be sitting here dealing with this month after month after month going forward, we're going to run out of money sooner than later.
So we have actively looked at all of the projects, existing projects in the program, and we have updated those estimates based on what we know today from unit costs and inflation, and we are covering those cost increases with funding in the 6-year program that will be presented to you for approval in June.
So after that allocation, that's when you said you had 12 million of high priority left.
Those funds, 12 million is what's currently here. We are working to cover those cost increases now, and we may use some of the reserve that was set aside, the 12% reserve. But we have enough.
And the 12% is round 5, right?
Yes, sir.
So we may have to go back and use some round 5 money.
It's possible, yes.
Thank you.
Got to finish what you got.
Oh.
But that's the exact point that I'm trying to help sure we don't end up in that boat. We don't underestimate the changes that are going to have to be made, whether that's design, public pushback, whether it's unit cost, whether it's overall inflation, whatever it is. I just hate being behind the curve. I'd rather be ahead of the curve. Say I overestimated and I was overly conservative. I'd rather do that than be short. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is the legislative update. Joanne Maxwell, good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'm Joanne Maxwell from VDOT. I'm going to give you, you have a handout of the various legislative actions that took place this past session. These are only, this is only involving legislation that actually passed or has been passed into law or is undergoing amendment or recommended amendment by the governor. I will be presenting the first set of the legislation or the legislative items, and then Andrew Wright from DRPT will be talking to you all about the DRPT associated legislation. The first item on this list is the amendment that was made to the Transportation Partnership Opportunity Fund. Currently today, the funds in that fund are basically intended for use to enhance transportation aspects of economic development projects. This bill, as drafted, and by the way, this was a governor's bill, this bill would also allow as an objective use of the funds to enhance the economic development opportunities of the Commonwealth's transportation program. To basically describe the effect of the bill objectively or operationally, what it does is it would allow the governor to direct funds, transportation opportunity funds, TPOF funds, to the CTB for expenditure on transportation projects determined either to be necessary to support the major economic development initiative or to enhance the economic development opportunities of the Commonwealth's transportation program. What would happen is the governor would, at the recommendation of the Secretary of Transportation and the Secretary of Commerce and Trade, would direct funds to the CTB. There's not a limit on the amount of the funds that could be so directed. However, there are some requirements associated with the amounts of the funds to be directed. If the amount of the funds the governor would be directing to the CTB for expenditure would, if the amount of funds exceed $5 million, then the Secretary is required, Secretary of Transportation is required to report to the Senate and House Finance chairs and staff the project that's being so funded or for which funds are being directed. If the amount that is directed by the governor exceeds $35 million for a particular project, then the project has to be submitted to the MEI Project Approval Board or Commission. That commission has 14 days to review the project. If they issue a negative recommendation, then the monies so directed cannot be used by the CTB for that purpose unless the General Assembly were to turn around and authorize the use of the funds that way. Unless they issue a negative recommendation within 14 days, unless the commission issues a negative recommendation within 14 days, the funds can be allocated by the CTB as directed by the governor. There are a couple of other aspects of the legislation. The main thing, the legislation directs the CTB to ensure that no funds from TPOF are used exclusively for economic development purposes. There still has to be some sort of a transportation aspect to the funding or the use of the funds.
Mr. Secretary.
Ms. Hines.
In my memory, Ms. Maxwell, this started out with a direction to take money from a particular place to enhance how much was in TPOF. Is Did that survive in this conversation?
Let me answer that. There's no additional money in TPOF because it was all part of the budget. And the budget, all part of the budget recommendations. And the budget was returned, the budget was given to us, and the governor has sent some amendments down, does not include any additional
Unenacted.
funding.
Oh, it does not include any.
So we've got the vehicle, we just don't have the money yet. The concept was we were going to start by moving $100 million out of the VTIB over to this, and then supplement it with $200 million that would come over 4 different tranches to get to a total of $300 million, and that would be our cap. That would be sort of our fund. And then we work through that, and basically, with permission of the MEI folks, we could spend over $35 million. Below that, the governor could make his decision on his or her own, with notice being given, but it was just notice, not request for approval. So that's where we are.
So there's no money current.
There's no additional money. TPOF gets a small an amount of money already, and there's some money there. I think John would tell me it's 12 million, 7 million is what's sitting in there now. So the good news is we've got a mechanism. The bad news is we don't have any dollars yet. But I think we'll get there. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair. The next slide, at the top of this, and I may not go through all of these bills.
Yeah, please, yeah.
I'll just, but this is a key bill, I think, that will be of significant interest to this board and VDOT. Basically, this bill would amend the State of Good Repair program, and it does so. A little bit of history. The joint JLARC issued a report recommending changes that are similar to what you see in this bill about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. Senator McPike put in legislation to accomplish JLARC's recommendations. The Secretary asked that VDOT be given a year to study the matter and then to make recommendations. So the bill that is before you now, or that I'm going to describe, is basically the same bill that VDOT recommended. I would note that the governor has not yet signed this bill. He's offering a recommendation on the legislation. So I'll explain to you what the bill does and then what the governor's amendment would propose to do. Basically, what the bill does is it would expand on the group of bridges that are eligible for SGR funding, from bridges that are just structurally deficient to also bridges that are on the cusp of becoming structurally deficient. So it would increase the number of bridges that are eligible for SGR funding. The second thing that the bill does, it expands on the type of work that can be done on the bridges, from not only reconstruction and replacement, but also any improvement that would enhance or increase the useful life of a bridge by at least 10 years. So it expands on the type of work that can be done on a bridge. Finally, the legislation that passed the House and the Senate would have removed the 5.5 minimum and the 17.5 cap that must be received by any district under the distribution of funding under SGR. That's what the bill did. The governor has now introduced an amendment that would reinstitute or reinstate the 5.5% minimum for...
Not the cap.
That's right. That is correct. The cap, there will be no cap at this point. So that's the legislation in a nutshell. It does not apply, it will not apply to until, in essence, June 1, 2024. Basically, it would prohibit or would only apply, the bill's provisions would only apply to new allocations or new project allocations by this board on or after June 1, 2024.
So this is the legislation that surrounded the whole Cuss Bridge, and while we're moving from one system to another, and this would help fund that. And so hopeful that we'll get through this.
And Mr. Chair, this will help support the preservation first approach to bridge repair and funding. I'm going to skip over, there are a couple of bills that are related to safety. Given the discussion today on safety, I just wanted to highlight those very quickly. First one is HB 2104. That bill was a very simple bill by the time it passed, and it would increase the boundaries, the default boundaries that are in code for school zones. Increases the boundary from 600 feet to 750 feet from the boundaries of a school. So it increases the size or the radius of a school zone. The next, what I will call safety-related bill, affects, in essence, the interpretation of yielding under the law. It, in essence, would say that in order, or define yielding as a motorist having to stop when a pedestrian is either in the lane and in the lane in front of them in a crosswalk, or in an adjacent lane and is approaching their lane. So the bill has more specifically defined what yielding means. It also allows, and this was probably the major impetus behind the legislation, it allows localities that are authorized to put up signage, to the pedestrian signage, it allows them to use not only a yield for pedestrian sign, but also they can use the stop for pedestrian sign. And that, I believe that was a key impetus behind the bill. And you will begin to see those. Actually, I think you're probably already seeing those signs. They're here in Richmond. So those are, I don't see a need to talk about any of the other legislation. If there are questions about a particular bill, I'm happy to entertain the questions. But at this point, unless there are any questions, I will defer to DRPT.
I just had one.
Any other questions? Mr. Merrill?
Just the one on the bill and the Transit Ridership Incentive Program.
We're going to get to that.
Mr. Secretary, if I could, I'd like to
Ma'am,
make
Mr. Brewer.
I'd like to make an introduction because this is Andy's first time standing in front of the CTB.
Welcome to the party, Andy.
Andy Wright is our Chief of External Affairs and Strategic Initiatives, and really is my right hand on everything that happens, kind of how our agency is viewed in the public face. And so he does a fantastic job with us. He's been with us. We actually started at the same time, so almost 7 years, and spearheaded our legislative efforts and our communications policy shop and our strategic plan. So just wanted to give him that introduction.
Welcome, Andy.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. So I'm here to talk about, lost the slides. Let's keep going. I'm here to talk about the bills that will impact DRPT and our transit and rail partners.
Get your slides up. Hold on. Make it work. We're back to legislation.
There we go.
There you go.
So the first bills I'll talk about are House Bill 1496 and Senate Bill 1079. These bills were sponsored by Delegate Austin and Senator Cosgrove. DRPT drafted this legislation and supported it during the session, and it was classified as a secretary's bill. The legislation makes changes to the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund as it relates to funding and oversight of the Virginia Railway Express and Washington Metro. However, I do want to point out it doesn't add any new funding for those entities. Specifically, it creates a separate category within the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund of up to 3.5% that will be dedicated solely to VRE. In exchange, VRE will no longer be eligible for funding from other categories within the fund. I want to point out that it's up to 3.5% annually, so DRPT will be back later this year with a policy proposal for the board's approval that will create performance metrics specific to commuter rail to determine the exact amount of the 3.5% that VRE would get every
Andy,
year.
I think what you said verbally is accurate, but what's written, is it up to 3.5%?
It is up to 3.5%.
What's written says allocates 3.5%.
No, the legislation is up to, and that's what.
Yeah.
So I'm making that distinction because it's not, what it says on the paper is not what it is.
Yes, so we'll create performance metrics for the board's approval. So theoretically, they'll run the metrics and It may say that the VRE should only get 3.4% one
And
year.
you may speak to why we wanted to do this.
Yes. So right now, VRE, like all the other transit agencies, is in the merit process. So they receive funding through the operating program as well as the capital assistance program. VRE voiced some concerns that going through that process, the metrics are bus specific, and that puts them at a disadvantage. So we decided to pull them out of the capital and operating program and create performance metrics that are specific to commuter rail to determine how much funding they get each year.
I think it's also accurate, and tell me if I'm right or not, that the gyration or the swings, BRE is such a big piece that this, when they did things, it swung.
Yes, so when they come
programs
into
so far.
correct, when they come into the capital program, for example, they're purchasing train sets, which is a large expenditure, which takes up a good part of our capital program. So this is actually a benefit to the other transit agencies, so they're no longer competing with VRE for that limited funding in our capital program.
We won't see those wild swings.
Yes. So additionally, the legislation make changes to the distribution of funding to the Northern Virginia Transportation Commission for WMATA. We send money 46.5% each year out of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund to NVTC for WMATA operating and capital assistance. This legislation states that for every dollar that we send to NVTC out of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund, it has to be matched by $1 from the locality. So it'll be a 50-50 split between the state and the localities. Lastly, the legislation creates several CTB oversight requirements for VRE and for WMATA. VRE and WMATA will have to provide the board with a copy of their annual budget and capital expenditures. And in the case of WMATA, the general manager and the Commonwealth's WMATA board members will have to come in person to the CTB each year to report on the agency's performance. Governor Youngkin signed this legislation on Monday, and again, as I said, DRPT will be back this summer and fall with some policy proposals to implement this legislation for the board's approval. The next bill that I want to mention, DRPT had no position on this bill, but it makes changes to the Transit Ridership Incentive Program. And just as a refresher, Transit Ridership Incentive Program, or TRIP, is 6% of the Commonwealth Mass Transit Fund. Right now, those dollars are used for programs for low-income individuals as well as for regional connectivity. This bill opens up the type of eligible projects. It adds bus shelters as an eligible project, and the governor's amendment adds projects that will improve crime prevention and public safety for transit users and operators. He offered that as an amendment, and it'll be up for consideration next month during the reconvened session. I'm just running through a few other bills. House Bill 2330, again, DRPT had no position on this bill, but makes it a Class 1 misdemeanor for an individual to commit an assault against a bus driver. House Bill 1752 and Senate Bill 1029, that attempts to resolve ongoing disputes between railroad companies and broadband providers. The broadband providers have claimed that railroad companies are taking too long in the application process to grant access for broadband to cross over railroad tracks. This has been a significant issue down in Southwest Virginia. The governor has signed that legislation. Senate Bill 1018 requires that when a railroad company submits an application to the federal government for consolidation, merger, abandonment, or discontinuance, that the railroad company also sends a letter making the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources, the DRPT Director, and the Executive Director of EPRA aware of that action. Currently, railroads are only required to send that information to the governor and the State Corporation Commission. Those were the major pieces of bills that we were tracking this year, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions for
Mr. Secretary, I see what SB 1085 has to do with noise surveys in relation to transportation issues. I guess that was vetoed by the governor. Just for
It is, correct? Joanne?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, that bill would have, at some point in time, it required VDOT to actually do a study regarding noise, et cetera. At the very last minute, the bill was amended to require the superintendent or state police to do the study, but nevertheless, I think the governor's vetoed the bill.
Right, thank you.
Mr. Secretary.
Dr. Smoot.
The language regarding virtual meetings refers only to committees. I think
You're ahead of us.
Am I getting ahead of us?
Yeah, you're ahead.
Trying to move us along, Mr. Secretary.
Good job, Mr. Booth.
Anyone else for Andy?
I'll come back later.
Here's what we're going to do, Dr. Smoot. We're going to adjourn, and we're going to go eat some lunch. And then we're going to come back in about 25 minutes.
That'll work.
Does that work?
Good evening.
We want to make sure Dr. Smoot gets into this a little bit.
Ready to go.
Thank you so much. We are back in order. Ms. Maxwell, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I'm here to, members of the board, I'm here to present to you a proposed policy for the CTB committees to conduct all virtual meetings. There we go. The reason we're coming before you with this policy is one or more committees of the CTB have from time to time been somewhat pressed to accomplish the work that they've been charged to accomplish in perhaps the one meeting a month that typically the CTB meets. And so in order, one potential resolution to that would be for the committees to have the opportunity to meet virtually in between CTB meetings or the regular scheduled CTB meetings. Couple of background notes I need to point out. The committees of the CTB are public bodies, just as is the CTB, and thus they're subject to the various rules that apply to the full board when they're conducting their meetings. The general rule under FOIA is that the meetings of public bodies are in person, and the public must be able to attend those meetings. The current practice of conducting, again, meetings, committee meetings, only on those days during which the CTB meets may provide a bit of a hindrance to committees that have expedited timelines for their work.
Last words. Expedited timelines. Expedited timelines.
So, Mr. Chair, in order to talk about the in-person meetings, generally the FOIA law is, as I mentioned, the general default rule is that public bodies meet in person and the public be able to attend in person. But there are certain conditions set out in FOIA whereby public bodies such as the CTB or its committees are entitled or allowed to meet remotely or virtually electronically. There's three scenarios contemplated under that statute. The first addresses or would involve individuals who may need to attend a particular meeting remotely. The second scenario that's contemplated under the statute is that the full body would want to conduct a meeting totally virtually, meaning everyone is virtual, the body does not, no members of the body really assemble in one location. And then finally, the third scenario that's contemplated by the statute is committees of public bodies may also likewise have or conduct all virtual meetings of the committee. The committee is deemed separate from the public body for purposes of the rules that address how often you can meet virtually, et cetera. basically, before any public body can allow or authorize or is authorized to conduct virtual meetings under any of those scenarios, the public body would have to, is required by law to adopt a policy to, for purposes of conducting virtual meetings. These meetings that are, or these policies and these meetings must also comply with not only with the policy, but with various requirements under the Freedom of Information Act. So we have put together a draft policy again for all virtual CTB committee meetings based on the need that has been pointed out to us. And before I get too far, I want to make sure that you understand that the policy defines a committee as a committee, a subcommittee, or any group of the consisting of CTB members that have been charged to assemble and either perform some sort of a function for the CTB or to gather for the purpose of advising the CTB. So we've made the definition of committee broad so that, for instance, if at some point someone decides a work group would need to convene or needs to be, a work group of CTB members needs to convene, they would fall under the definition of committee for purposes of this policy. The policy, the first thing that's paramount is that there's an understanding, and this is addressed by the policy, it's statutory requirement. A public body can only meet virtually twice a year or no more than 25% of its meetings, whichever is greater. And then a public body may meet virtually, cannot meet virtually back-to-back in back-to-back meetings. So in other words, to the extent they're going to have virtual meetings, they have to alternate. They'd have to have a virtual meeting and then an in-person meeting. So those are two key requirements under the law, under the policy that need to be kept in mind for planning purposes. The policy also, as required by law, sets out the process for requesting and receiving authorization to conduct the all-virtual meeting. So under the policy, we are basically proposing that any member of a committee could submit to the chair of the CTB a request for an all-virtual meeting of the committee. The chair, and that request has to be submitted at least 15 working days prior to the contemplated meeting date. And then the chair would then render a decision as to whether or not he would authorize the meeting at least 7 working days prior to the meeting date. I would also note that this policy clearly states that it does not modify the existing CTB policy prohibiting committees from conducting closed meetings or executive sessions. So that's something to bear in mind too. That general overall rule or practice is not changed by this policy. Other key statutory requirements for all virtual committee meetings, and I would note that all of these points are in the policy themselves, and so the policy is intended to provide you with as many of the statutory requirements as routinely would apply. So basically, the notice of the meeting must be posted in accord with section 2.23707. It has to state that the meeting will be all virtual. Also, notices under FOIA, and in the case of virtual committee meetings, must be posted at least 3 working days prior to the meeting. The electronic communication means that's used must allow the public to hear all members and/or see all members if audio-video technology is available. There also has to be posted contact information for purposes of allowing the public to notify the public body if, or in this case a committee, if the electronic transmission fails or falters. Basically what would happen is if it does fail, a transmission fails, the committee is supposed to be monitoring calls, and if they receive a call that the transmission has failed, the committee must recess, and they cannot go back into the meeting until transmission is restored. So that's a little bit of a risk with an all-virtual meeting, just to keep in mind. The agenda and all related materials, like any other meeting of the CTB, have to be made available to the public at the same time that they're made available to the members of the committee. And then the public must be provided opportunity to comment through electronic means at committee meetings where public comment is going to be received. So bottom line, the public needs to be able to provide comment electronically as well. Other key statutory requirements, when you're having an all-virtual meeting, no more than 2 members of the committee could be assembled in the same place. Otherwise, if there are more than 2 members assembled somewhere, the public has to be able to attend. Minutes of the meetings must be taken with draft minutes and final minutes posted in accord with the law. And also, they have to include the fact that the meeting was held by electronic communication means. In addition, because the law requires that a record of the meeting, all virtual meeting requests be recorded or be made, documented, what we're proposing in this policy is that the fact that whether the meeting that's being conducted is either a virtual meeting or an in-person meeting of the committee, if a request for an all-virtual meeting was made, the minutes need to reflect that and the results of the review, whether or not it was authorized or denied. Just in summary, and as a little bit of a caveat, the policy notes that there may be other provisions under the Freedom of Information Act that might apply to committee meetings, all virtual committee meetings. To the extent there might be questions that arise, those questions could be presented, the policy says that they should be presented to the chair. So that in a nutshell is the policy. You have there is a resolution in your packet for the action meeting. And in that resolution, you'll also see the policy which attached, which virtually is identical to the points we just described. If in order for any committee of this board to meet virtually, the full board will have to enact a policy before that can happen. So we will be providing, you have a resolution in your action packet that will ask you to consider the policy and whether or not you want to approve it. And if you approve it, then committees of this board could go on and proceed.
Any questions? Dr. Smoot?
Mr. Secretary, thank you. Joanne and I had an opportunity to talk during lunch, and the concern I was going to raise, which Joanne, I believe, is fully addressed, is we often refer to our committees as subcommittees rather than committees. But it applies to subcommittees too, so we don't really have to be too concerned about that.
Mr. Chair, he's exactly right. We've put in the policy a definition of committee to encompass any group of the CTB that's been assigned a task or duty or responsibility to advise the board. So we're good.
Okay. And second question, where are we with regard to permitting one or several members, but not a majority of the board, to participate virtually at an in-person meeting here, since that person can't get here for the meeting?
Mr. Chair, as mentioned, that's one of the scenarios that's contemplated under the statute. The board would have to enact a policy to allow for that.
So we do not have that?
You do not have that in this policy, no.
Okay.
Mr. Secretary?
Slides.
So Joanne, the request has to be conveyed at least 15 working days. Is the 15 working days in the statute?
No, that's not statutory. What is statutory is the fact that you have to have a process for requesting and a process for a decision.
So I would just point out that typically we meet every 30 days, but it's really only 20 working days. And so it might give us a little more flexibility, both in terms of getting together, but also in terms of anything that we would then be trying to take to a workshop or an action meeting, to back that up to 10 working days. I just think at 15, we barely have a week, maybe, before the next CTB meeting. It just doesn't give you a lot of time to schedule. So I would point that out. And let me echo Ray's observation that it would be really good for the CTB to have this hybrid opportunity, limited as the statute allows it. You know, you could be sick or something could happen and your car would break down and you just couldn't get here. To be able to join both an in-person committee meeting and an in-person CTB meeting virtually, again, with all the limitations that there are, I just think allows us a little more room to move. So I'd love to see that come back.
Mr. Chair, I think that's a prerogative of the board.
Besides your 15 working day thing, one, we have to do there has to be some notification of this, does there not, of this meeting?
Mr. Chair, there are two issues, primarily to give the chair some time to decide, make a decision, and then also to give staff the opportunity to make the technology, IT arrangements for a virtual meeting, and as well as we absolutely have to post a notice no more than 3 working days prior to the meeting. And in that notice, we have to be able to articulate what is going to be the electronic means for the public to attend, so to speak.
Oh, yeah, I mean, so this meeting could happen anytime, the day after a CTB meeting, the day before a CTB meeting. It's not, you know, it's not, knows when the meeting might happen. The question is, what's an appropriate amount of time? I don't need a lot of time to approve or disapprove, and I don't think anyone else would. But what's an adequate amount of time to do all
I think,
the technology and all that?
Mr. Chair, I think the 7 days that we've, you know, the rendering of the decision no more than 7 working days prior, that gives staff plenty of time. I think the issue with regard to the 15 versus 10 working days for the secretaries, you know, for notifying the secretary in advance, I don't know that we see that as an issue. That I think that is more your prerogative.
Gotcha.
Ms. Secretary.
Yes, sir, Mr. Yates.
As chair of a subcommittee, you appointed me to, only got 3 weeks virtual meeting, and without the 10-day clause, we can't do it.
Well, let's be clear about something. It is not the desire that we try to have more virtual meetings. It's the desire to have virtual meetings when it's inappropriate or unreasonable to otherwise do so. So, as the chair, I'm going to deal with this in that way, in that spirit, right? And use it as a practical way to fix a practical problem. Virtual. So, you know, I don't have any problem modifying. I didn't sort of bless the 15 or not, so I think 10's enough.
Mr. Chair, we could very quickly probably modify it to 10 working days. Would that?
Very quickly, we just could do it like by just saying it.
But we can amend the resolution from the table.
Well, yeah, I mean, I just say it.
Absolutely. We could do that. So.
But we're not at that stage yet. So does anybody else have any thoughts about this? Positive or negative? Or okay. So we'll bring it back in the action, change it to 10.
Sir, Mr. Chair.
We'll go from there.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, will you consider bringing something for remote participation by an individual member?
Yeah, we're going down the slippery slope. You know, it's a matter of real inability versus inconvenience.
Right, and I would just say to you, in Northern Virginia, people have been doing this for the last 4 years or so, even before the pandemic, having to do with illness and other things, and we haven't had abuses at all.
Good people up there.
So are we, sitting around this table, sir.
There are no more questions. Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is the U.S. Route 58 Corridor Transportation Revenue Bonds. Ms. Laura Farmer, good afternoon, Ms. Farmer.
Good afternoon.
Welcome.
Thank you. I'm here today to talk about an upcoming planned issuance of the bonds for Route 58 corridor program. Today I'm going to give you a brief overview of the history of Route 58 and what we're asking to move forward by the board. So back in 1989, the General Assembly established both the fund and the program to develop the Route 58 corridor with the goal of improving travel and enhancing economic development access across a largely rural segment of Southern Virginia. It authorized $600 million of revenue, dedicated the first $40 million of recordation taxes to the program's funding. 10 years later, they authorized an additional $3 million to bring the total to $704.3 million in debt authorized, and identified the projects that would receive that funding, and required the governor and the secretary to propose funding to support debt service of that additional authorization. Moving forward to more recent history, in 2013, an additional almost $600 million was authorized, bringing the total program value to $1.6 billion worth of debt to deliver improvements along Route 58. Those actions include prioritizing the completion of 3 sections, Crooked Oak, Vesta, and Lover's Leap. Actions by the General Assembly that year also provided $20 million from the highway share of the Transportation Trust Fund beginning in fiscal year 2020. That does not have a sunset in it, so if you're following along, beginning in 2020, 40 million plus 20 is 60 million a year. And it required that any additional debt be supported by the existing revenue stream of Route 58.
Laura, could you go back for a second?
Yes, sir.
You went from the 20 and the 20 and you went to 60. Can you explain that again?
Yes, sir. So in 2013, the $40 million from recordation taxes, as envisioned in the late 1980s, was provided as a $40 million general fund support to VDOT to support the debt service. And then beginning in 2020, we began transferring an additional $20 million from the highway share of the Transportation Trust Fund distribution. And so that is $60 million total a year.
Thank you.
So Chapter 1230 from 2020, the transportation omnibus legislation, provided that $40 million that represented recordation taxes from the general fund from the Commonwealth Transportation Fund rather than directly from a representation of recordation taxes. It also added the completion of Corridor Q and the Appalachian Development Highway System to the list of prioritized projects. And the $20 million that started in fiscal year 2020 as scheduled 7 years prior continues into the future. And so we still have $60 million a year dedicated to the program. We have issued all the authorizations prior to the 2013 action of the General Assembly. I came to you about a year ago during session, and we sold bonds in March of 2022. Mainly to support the Lover's Leap project that was under construction. That contract was executed in fall of 2020 with a scheduled completion date of spring 2026. With the issuance that we did last spring of about $119.5 million in par value, we've spent down the proceeds to a remaining balance of 28.7 while the construction on the project continues. So after we get through the proposed issuance, which I'll go through in the next slide, our planned schedule is to come back in 26 or 27 for subsequent issuance for the remaining authorization provided a few years back.
Laura, before you go forward, as we have talked about CPI and the inflation and the unit prices and all that going up. And as we've talked about sometimes in this venue and other times in staff venues, that we're trying to accelerate projects so that we can sort of get ahead of that curve. So we've got bond authorization we will use in 2026, 2027, 3 to 4 years from now, depending on the project spending. So the obvious question is there a way to accelerate the projects so that we're not having the ravages of inflation, take the remaining bond authorization and taking 30% off of it in 4 or 5 years in terms of spending power? Maybe that's more of a commissioner's question. But we're looking at that other places, get money out and spent, because otherwise we're just losing the buying power every day. Is that something that we have an opportunity for here?
Mr. Secretary, the members of the board, the next section to be constructed is Vesta, and that work is, the preliminary engineering work is underway today to be able to make sure that this is a permittable project, similar to the actions that we took to be able to advance Lover's Leap to this stage. So that work is underway today and advancing, being phased. We have not done the same to Crooked Oak, because Crooked Oak is a very similar concept of partial greenfield, partial realignment. If we find that Vesta is not a permittable project under the current design, then we need to go back and redo both of them to be able to make them permittable. So a little bit of that work is being done right now with Vesta and advancing that in the preliminary engineering. I don't have the project schedule. Laura, I'm not sure if you have the project schedule for Vesta to advance it.
Well, I know that generally we have the attitude that if we have the money and we have the project, we want to advance it as quickly as possible for, obviously for the inflation reasons, but also for the use reasons. So hopefully we will continue to have that as a focus. And if we find opportunities, we ought to take advantage of them. Thank you.
So the planned bond proceeds for this program are fully allocated to projects in the program. As previously mentioned, the current focus for most of the bond proceeds is the Lover's Leap project that is under construction and Corridor Q that is also under construction. This slide just provides a summary of the terms we expect to have on this transaction. With the schedule, we'd like to sell in early June and close in June. The bonds are backed by the funds that are dedicated to the Route 58 Corridor Development Fund and to the extent required from anything available in the Transportation Trust Fund as a backstop to the bonds. Our target proceeds is $236.3 million with fixed rate serial bonds maturing annually over 25 years. Our preliminary numbers run last week after an eventful week in the market as well as the Fed, with a par value of just shy of $211 million of that sizing. Our all-in TIC for the transaction is at 3.9%, just as a projection based on today's rates. And the annual debt service on this will not exceed $15 million. In comparison, our true interest cost from last year's transaction was 3.182. So rates are higher as expected. So we hope we can hold to that between now and June.
25%.
The 3.99, that's still pretty good.
Yes, sir.
Take it.
So if you agree, next month at the board meeting, you will have a resolution for your consideration as well as all the associated offering documents. We would then go to Treasury Board in May, seek ratings from the rating agencies and the governor's approval as well, with sale and closing in June. And I'll be happy to take any additional questions.
Is that a rate lock on that?
I apologize, I'm
Is there
sorry.
a lock on that?
No, sir. This is just our financial analyst running a rate based on today's market conditions.
Oh, that could change.
Yes, sir.
Anyone else? Thank you, Ms. Farmer.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Burrell.
So I have 2 items in the folder for the board today. One is our quarterly financial report that we provide to you each quarter. No surprises in there. Everything is as it should be. And then you have my prepared director's report. Again, that's just an update on ridership and our general trends. We had a discussion about it in the Rail and Transit Subcommittee this morning. One of the things that's a little different in there this month is I've included a list of all of the IIJA discretionary applications that we've made that we're waiting for feedback from the feds on. So
Fingers crossed.
fingers crossed. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Burrell? Thank you, Madam Director.
No questions, Mr. Secretary, just that
Casper.
safe travels as she departs for her inspection tour of Swiss railways.
We're very
On
we're very
vacation. On vacation.
Big tool.
But I do believe the folks from VPRA are expecting to see lots of pictures and suggestions for how we can improve rail in Virginia.
You're going to come back with a whole new
That's the place to
perspective.
Well, I will tell you,
And Mr. Secretary.
since you brought that up, Mr. Kasparitz and Mr. Burrell, when I was recently in the Middle East, I took some pictures of some bus stops. And I can assure you, they don't cost $1 million to build one. And I thought, wow, they work okay, and like, people are sheltered, and, it was an overhang, but it was it looked a little different than the one we have out here on Broad Street, that's all I can tell you. Yes, somebody else had something to say.
It was me, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir,
I
Mr.
said
Merrill.
This morning, the members of the Rail and Transit Subcommittee did have a meeting, and Mr. Wu gave an excellent report on several very positive developments that are advancing through DRPT. So just commend her and her team for the success they're advancing.
Thank you. Mr. Commissioner.
Mr. Secretary, I'm going to defer my comments recognizing the lateness of the meeting.
Anybody have any questions?
Second.
We have a long list. No. All right, that's great. I'm going to do the same. I think I've commented enough during the meeting. And so without any further discussion, I'm going to close the workshop meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And I'm going to open the meeting, the action meeting of the Commonwealth Transportation Board. And the first item on the agenda is public comments. Mr. George Mapp is here from Williamsburg, maybe, Mr. Mapp. Eastern Shore.
Sure,
You just came to Williamsburg because you thought it was the capital still, right?
colonial capital, right?
Sure.
Yes, I spend.
Mr. Mapp gets to hang out in both places.
I'm getting ready to go to Silver Beach for the warm months here.
Perfect.
Very
Perfect.
soon here. So, awesome.
Welcome.
I just wanted to give an update on the rail trail, Eastern Shore Rail Trail project. Last month, we submitted federal funds applications for two. One of them was $23 million for a RAISE grant, and the other one was $1 million for an earmark with Senator Kane's office. And we also had our public hearing, which VDOT conducted, and it went over very nicely. I liked the poster session format that they gave. That people could ask questions and actually talk to VDOT people who could give authoritative answers for their questions. I thought that was a very nice, went over very well. That's it.
Well, thank you for coming.
All right.
We're excited about what you're doing, and keep up the good work. Thank you very much. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. They've been distributed in the package. Is there a motion to approve?
Move.
Merrill moves, Ms. Sellers seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Item number 1, Virginia Passenger Rail Authority, action on the fiscal year 2024 capital expenditures and projects budget. Mr. Steve Pittard.
Thank you,
Hey, Mr. Pittard.
I'm doing well. How are you doing? Thank you. So just real quick, our budget is derived from a constantly evolving financial planning process. We are committed to coming back to this board if there are any significant changes during the year based on changing cost estimates or changes in sources of funding. Based on some feedback we did receive from my presentation last month, there were some minor changes made to the document. All of those changes relate to classifications of funding sources. We did send some slides out to this board that documented those changes. That being stated, no changes were made to the capital expenditure portion of the budget, which is what I'm here today seeking your approval for. With that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Have any questions? We've got a recommendation. Do we have a motion to approve?
Move approval.
Second.
Mr. Caspert's moves and Dr. Smoot seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you, Mr. Pittard.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Next item on the agenda is item 2, action on the discontinuance of the secondary system of state highways, Route 676 in Fairfax County. Mr. Hoffrichter, welcome.
Good afternoon. I bring before you 2 discontinuances in Fairfax County. First is for Route 676. It's a short segment of former roadway. There is no pavement there presently. It goes south from the W&OD Trail and hits Lawyers Road, and that's the segment we're talking about. County is in support. We have received no comments, so apparently there is peace in the valley.
A motion to approve?
So moved, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you. Mrs. Hines motions, Mr. Caspert seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? All right, item 3, Mr. Hoffrichter.
Route 1049 in Fairfax County, again, there's no pavement there. It's essentially a connection between 2 subdivisions. Hasn't been a road in place in a while, but it's still on the books. It is used by pedestrians, and hence the county has requested that it be discontinued instead of abandoned. Local staff supports it. It looks like it's appropriate for that. Once again, no comments received.
Could you tell us what the difference is between discontinuance and abandonment?
So an abandonment is an action that extinguishes that property for use for transportation purposes. It then just essentially becomes just regular property. For discontinuance, what it means, the full term for it is discontinuance of maintenance. So what that means is VDOT stops maintaining it. So it's still a transportation facility. Mostly it reverts to local control, so county control.
Control for maintenance or control for ownership?
Control for maintenance and operation. The ownership is whatever the fee simple ownership is in any case.
Secretary, I move approval.
Thank you. Second. Caspert seconds. Further discussion?
Yes, actually. So what's the status of the ownership on this particular piece in that it's part of 2 subdivisions? Is it owned by VDOT, the fee simple?
I believe, and I didn't research this carefully, but I believe that the property was dedicated to transportation purposes, so that would be county owned.
So I'm still not clear. So are we the owners, and then who would the new owners be if it's not us?
Mr. Secretary.
Mr. Lawson.
What's going to happen is, unless it's formally abandoned, it's going to be owned by government. Once it's been dedicated to...
The local jurisdiction?
Yeah, typically those are dedicated to Fairfax County, and then at a quarterly term or whatever, they're given over to the Commonwealth. If it was never given over to the Commonwealth, then it would rest with the county. If it's with the Commonwealth, it's with the Commonwealth. And the only way to get rid of that, and it was a great question, is through the formal abandonment process. So the ownership remains with government.
In this case, it would be the county.
Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Any further discussion? We had a motion and a second, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hans and Mr. Casper, it's correct. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next item is item 4, Mr. Robbie Prezioso, action on
We already acted
We already
on
did that. Item number 5, action on commemorative naming of a section of U.S. Route 501 and Campbell Highway.
Good afternoon, sir.
Welcome back.
The item we have before you today is for the Judge J. Samuel Johnston Memorial Highway. This is Route 501 in Campbell County. This is from the south Lynchburg city limits down to Route 24 near Rustburg. County passed a resolution in February of this year, and this is for Judge Johnston. He served Campbell County with great distinction. He was a judge for over 30 years, starting from his time he earned his degree at the University of Alabama and then got his law degree from UVA. So at the age of 30, he was appointed to the Campbell County General District Court, making him at the time the youngest judge on the circuit in that area. In this state, I'll read it correctly in a second. In the state. And then 1981, he was appointed to the circuit court, and at that time was the youngest judge there as well. In his 30 years, he presided over hundreds of trials that impacted thousands of lives. He was known for his thoughtfulness, fairness, and his commitment to justice. Following his retirement, he was a substitute judge for the 24th Judicial Circuit. He participated in statewide mediation groups. He did many speaking engagements. He was an inspiration to many of those around him and his peers. He even authored what I understand is a humorous book, Why Judges Wear Robes. And the county has made this request based on a resolution in February, and VDOT recommends its approval.
Mr. Dodson.
Yes, Mr. Secretary. I knew Judge Johnston. He was the Judge Judy of his time. With crack jokes, he was a really great guy. A real Southern gentleman. Actually, I noticed that the Board of Supervisors in Campbell County passed a resolution to do this before he passed away, so they had to step back and wait till he passed away. But he was a wonderful guy, and I recommend the resolution.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second? Second. Sellers seconds. Is there further discussion? We have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Further discussion. Is there any abstentions? And I'm going to ask us to rise because I didn't do that, so let's rise and honor Judge Johnston. Thank you very much.
Secretary, I was going to say, if you have a function for the road name, I'll be there with your approval and say that we have a Secretary of Transportation like Judge Johnson.
There you go. Thank you, sir. The next item on the agenda is item 6, Mr. Rick Wurzman, action on limited access control changes for Potomac Commuter Garage in Prince William County. Thank you,
Good
sir.
afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I am here to present on behalf of Emmett Heltzel for the limited access control change for a project in Nova District. Prince William County has designed and is currently constructing through a design-build contract a 1,400 space parking garage and associated road improvements just east of I-95 at Opitz Boulevard. This construction is going to require the removal of 36 feet approximately of existing limited access to make room for the additional turn lane that is to be built. The project has had a public hearing, and the county is in support of the project. It's a fairly routine project and change in limited access.
Thank you, sir. Is there any discussion?
Mr. Secretary, I'll move approval.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. A motion to approve. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Merrill seconds. Without further discussion, all in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you, sir, very much.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is Ms. Kim Pryor, action on the FY 23-28 6-year improvement plan transfers, program transfers.
Sir, thank you. I recommend your approval of our monthly transfers as presented in the attachment.
Do you have any questions? A motion to approve?
Move approval.
Dr. Smoot moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Mr. Casper seconds. There's a motion and a second. Is there further discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Item 8, Ms. Pryor.
Thank you. The next item is the amendment of a project for the Eastern Shore Trail to the 6-year improvement program to provide $4 million to support preliminary engineering for the trail, and I recommend your approval.
Where's Mr. Matt? There he is. He's waiting patiently.
Motion to approve.
Is there a motion to approve? Mr. Coleman moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Hines?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Ms. Hines has a second. Is there further discussion? Mr. Merrill?
Would it be possible to get an update either at the next meeting or the following meeting on where we are with the trails? You know, we voted to approve $1 million for each of the 5 trails prioritized by the legislature to do preliminary work, and I'm getting requests from my constituents about what the status
Yeah,
is.
will we be ready by then, next meeting?
I can provide an update.
We can certainly give you something by next meeting. Yes, sir. So we have a motion, we have a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed say no. Much. Item number 9.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The last item is the approval of a smart-scale budget increase for the Hydraulic Road and Route 29 intersection that I just briefed you on earlier during the workshop, and I recommend your approval.
A motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and we have a second. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Mr. Byers, thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Hines. Yates, I mean. Item number 10, Joanne Maxwell. And as you recall, we're going to change this, this resolution, this motion to change from 15 days to 10 days. Otherwise, it's as was presented previously. Correct, Ms. Maxwell?
And Mr. Chair, as noted, I've already sent Carol the updated policy that now accounts for 10 days.
That's fine.
As opposed for notice. And then I'd propose that the resolution that's passed simply read pursuant to 2.23708.3 of the Code of Virginia. CTB hereby adopts a policy for all virtual electronic committee meetings as set forth in
Is this what you've
attachment
already put
A
in?
as revised.
Said as revised.
Yeah, as revised,
And we'll add as
3/29/23.
So moved.
Hines makes the motion.
Second.
Yates seconds. Further discussion? To be clear, we're going to add as revised, and we're going to change 15 to 10. That's the motion in the second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Mr. Hall, action on the standard project agreement. Welcome back.
Yes, sir. Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary, members of the board. With regard to the information I provided this morning during the workshop, the action before you is requesting that the board authorize the commissioner to enter into a standard project agreement with HR TAC to allocate funding for the implementation of various strategies identified in the Hampton Roads Express Lanes Transportation Management Plan.
Second.
Mr. Coleman moves and Ms. Hines seconded. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Next item on the agenda is item number 12. It's going to come in 2 parts. First, Mr. Robbie Prezioso. Thank you, sir.
First item is item for award. This is a maintenance services contract in the Stanton District. This is referred to our flexible asset maintenance services contract. It will cover the northern portion of 81 in Stanton District and the small piece of I-66 there. There were 4 bids. This is a 5-year contract. The price is just under $21 million. The bidder identified for award is Ferrovial Services. We recommend your approval.
Declared.
Moved.
Second.
We have a motion and we have a second. Mr. Merrill moves and Mr. Lawson seconds. Is there further discussion?
Comment, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, sir, Mr. Kasplitz.
I'd just like to commend the Stanton District on finding 4 bidders for this maintenance contract. I know it's a difficult challenge to find 4 that can qualify, so well done. I hope the price reflects the level of competition.
Yes, sir.
It's a great place to work.
We have a motion and we have a second. We finished our discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you very much. Mr. Coker.
Good afternoon, Mr. Secretary. How are
How
you
are
today?
you? Welcome. Good, great, thank you. Hope you are too.
I'm doing well, doing well. I have 3 proposals today to present to you in excess of $5 million.
Those special colors on your tie, Mr. Coker?
Yes, sir. Thank you for noticing. This is Chicago maroon and burnt orange. If you're not aware, the Lady Hokies basketball is in the Final Four this weekend, so I'm trying to fly that flag, sir.
Yeah, the alma mater of my father. So.
There you go.
I just wanted to give you an opportunity. You had a big
like
smile
a
and a big tie. I figured you needed to say something. Thank you. We wish the Lady Hokies well.
Yep. All right, so first project for discussion is Order H62 in the Hampton Roads District. This is a bridge repair project over the Nottoway River in Southampton County. We had 5 bidders, the low bidder being Crowder Construction. The low bid was just over $5 million and was within range. I recommend award.
Bowman.
Assume that's bridge repairs instead of bride repairs.
Well, might be the same.
Maybe not.
Can't get a bride repair for $5 million.
All right, we're not in discussion yet. Mr. Coleman's going to make a motion.
I made a motion.
Then we're going to get a second.
Didn't hear me for this fine young man.
The sellers gave a second, and the chair is going to rule that all discussion's already been had. So we're going to call for the vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed, say no. Are there any abstentions? You got us going down a rabbit hole there, sir.
I put that in there on purpose to make sure they were paying attention.
Right. Yeah.
Next project is Order J45, Bristol District. Is a state of good repair. This is a bridge replacement over Norfolk Southern Railroad in Lee County. We have 4 bidders. Low bidder was Order Construction Company out of St. Albans, West Virginia, with a low bid just under $5.5 million, and it was within range. I recommend award.
Chairman, I move approval.
Thank you very much. We have a motion. Mr. Casper, seconds. Is there further discussion? All in favor say aye. All opposed say no. Are there any abstentions? Thank you.
Last project is a design build project in the project from mile marker 221 to 225 in Augusta County. We had 3 bids. The low bid was Kokosin Construction Company. They were the best value bid, the highest technical score, and the low bidder with a bid of just over $100 million. And this was within the range. I recommend award.
We have a motion to approve.
I moved.
Merrill moves and Mr. Laird seconds. Can we go back under discussion to the very first one you gave us, Mr. Coker?
Yes, sir.
Can you go to the next one? I'm in trouble with the technology. Next one. Keep going. Go to the next one. No. Go forward now. Start with the first one and come all the way to the one you just were on. Green. Come on. Green. All green. No underestimates, no. And we beat you up on that, right?
Oh, a time or two. Yes, sir.
But they're all green, and I wanted to thank you.
Yes, sir.
And I think it is maybe prophetic about what's going to happen with the Lady Hokies. All be green.
Mr. Secretary, can I
Can only
question
hope.
something? Is this 81 money?
Yes, it's part of the
$100
quarter
million
agreement.
money, passed, appropriated by the General Assembly a few years ago for Interstate 81.
It's putting a second lane in one more lane in each direction.
Well, if you didn't have the legislation passed, you wouldn't have that $100 million.
Good work, sir. So we
Thank
have a
you.
motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. Are there any abstentions? Congratulations, sir. Good work.
Thank you. Have a nice night.
Thank you. Is there any new business? Hearing none, we're going to adjourn. Have a safe trip. Thank you so much for everything you do, and I look forward to seeing you soon.